5, 4, 3, 2.
Well, good evening. Before we call the council to order, I just, for those that are here and those that will be watching either now or later, this tonight is the joint meeting of the City Council, a special meeting, but also the Citizens Planning Commission regular meeting. And we're having this meeting collectively because there's items that are pertinent to both the City Planning Commission and important in their role in the development of plans, and also the City Council in our action as well. So at this time, I'm going to call the council to order and ask the clerk, please call the roll of the City Council.
Councilperson Felder,
Present.
Whitman,
Here.
Steelgrave,
Here.
Vining,
Here.
Germaini,
Here.
Lamore,
Present.
Mayor Clark.
Present. So as we have these type of joint meetings, then we have two roles to do. And of course, we have the role of the Citizens Planning Commission as well. And I'm going to turn that over to Chairperson Schwartz at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to call the CPC Planning Commission to order. Caitlin, can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner McDonough, Ziegler,
Here.
Williamson,
Here.
Madison,
Present.
Wells, White, Chairman Schwartz.
Here.
So we're going to share this agenda as we move along, Chairman Schwartz and I, but the next is the Pledge of Allegiance. And I don't think we all can know that we need to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So one of the items in a shared meeting like this, and just for not just convenience, but for orderly, and if clerk is assisted as well as the manager on this, we have an agenda that we have proposed, and it's a joint agenda that is both of the City Council and for the Planning Commission. And before I ask for a motion for the approval, this will be done collectively, and we'll do a roll call vote, not a roll call, but a all in favor vote on this. But I want to read this so it's clear for everybody here and those listening as well. So it's the approval of the agenda. It's moved to proceed with the joint administration of the special meeting of the City Council and regular meeting of the Citizens Planning Commission for Mayor Clark to preside over the meeting and to authorize the preparation of a joint meeting minutes of both the City Council and the Citizens Planning Commission. So that's our agenda, and as you look to further on both sides, there's action that the Citizens Planning Commission will be taken individually, but also the presentations, and at the end there's actually a council action item. So we're gonna balance those as we go along. For at this time, there's a approval of the agenda, and we're looking for a motion in a second, correct? Councilman Lamore?
Your Honor, I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as written.
It's a motion by Councilman Lamore, supported by Councilwoman Stillgrave, and for the approval of the agenda as stated. And this is a roll call vote not only for the City Council, but also for the Citizens Planning Commission. So at this time, I'll ask if this is all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Very well. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to Chairperson Schwartz for the Citizens Planning Commission action item. Mr. McDowell, you can come right up here. Your seat's right up here, sir. Mr. McDowell.
All right. We just have one action for the CPC Planning Commission this evening, right now, the consent agenda. I just need a motion to approve the consent agenda,
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
and a motion by Commissioner Madison. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Second by Commissioner Wells. Roll call, please.
Commissioner McDonough,
Here. Yes.
Ziegler,
Yes.
Williamson,
Yes.
Madison,
Yes.
Wells,
Yes.
Chairman Schwartz.
Yes. Consent agenda passes. Back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chairperson. So we have items on this agenda, which is presentations. This is the general heading that we usually have, but there's 3 presentations this evening. I'm just going to review those quickly. It's the Park and Recreations Master Plan, the Trails Master Plan, and the Capital Improvement Project Budget Presentation. This time I'm going to look to Mr. Pasteur, our City Manager, if you could then coordinate those for us, along with the Clerk Treasurer Lavoy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry, if I could introduce Lucy Thornton with the Manikin Smith Group. Lucy has worked with city staff, Loretta LaPointe, and myself in developing the 5-year Parks and Recreation Plan. The trail and the bicycle and pedestrian trail plan was developed in conjunction with the Trail Advisory Committee that the City Council had established. And so I think, Lucy, you plan on doing both of those together since we're in doing the Parks and Rec plan. We're looking to attach or treat as an appendix to the bicycle and pedestrian trail plan as well. So with that, if I could turn it over to Lucy to go through the plan as been drafted.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is this on?
Don, Millward will make it better.
He'll just as we go.
So about a year ago, city embarked on developing their first bicycle and pedestrian plan and updating their 5-year parks plan. And that's what I'm here tonight to talk to you about. It's really been my name is Lucy, and it's totally been a privilege for me to be able to do that for you because I am a city resident. And I've been able to share my knowledge of the city as well as my expertise in the area, which is truly a privilege. It makes me nervous too, so I apologize if I sound a little shaky here because I want to do so good. So it is really 2 efforts I'm going to talk about. The first one is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and the second is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Improvement Plan. The 5-year plan is something that is necessary, that the city goes through every 5 years. It's supposed to be setting out the what you want to do in the next 5 years as far as your city parks improvements. It's also necessary for staying eligible for grant programs through the MDNR. So you really want to do that, and the city has really been taking advantage of those programs in the last 40 years, frankly. So, and it's something you want to do. The bicycle and pedestrian plan is really the first that you've done. Many cities around the states and the nation really do that and set out a way they're going to go about improving their city in terms of for pedestrians and for bicyclists. So what we were looking to is really coming out with clear action and improvement projects for you and to make recommendation for you to decide on. So I'm going to first touch upon very briefly on the 5-year plan. And I want to point out, this is a picture of Labor Park, your newer park, and really a true jewel that were able to develop in the last 5 years. There's been a lot of improvements in the parks, and you are set and slated to do some more next year, in particular at Father Kearns, and it's really exciting what's happening in the city. 5-year plans have a specific format they have to follow per the state. And they need to include community description. They need to describe the administrative structure of the city as far as how do you operate parks and recreation services. And there needs to be public input. And you have to set some goals and objectives and have an action plan for the 5 years. So in this case, this Parks and Recreation Master Plan is very similar to your last one, which I was also privileged to help you with. But it also brings together all the initiatives you did in most recent past, and that includes the update to the River Raisin Heritage Corridor East Master Plan, the Downtown Plan, the Riverwalk Improvement Plan, and the park, and brings together more up-to-date park development plans that you had started in 2017. So very briefly, I want to highlight the goals and objectives, which are, again, very similar to the last version of this plan. Number 1 is really to continue to maintain and improve your existing parks by providing high-quality recreational experience for your city residents. Number two is really capitalizing on the river raisin for both land and water recreation. Number three is to build on Monroe's existing historic assets and to promote the city as a cultural tourism destination. People might be tired of hearing that, but we need to keep saying it because part of the attraction in Monroe and what makes Monroe unique is this heritage. Number four is to plan for a city-wide network of bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and that's what also I'm going to touch upon after this. And fifth is striving for excellency in park maintenance, in park operations, and park stewardship. As far as your action plan, and I will highlight just a few because I think you see it in your document that you were handed, some of the park projects that are coming along and others that are planned and hopefully will come along as well. Father Kearns Park is going to be another jewel along with Labor Park. It's going to become truly a community park with a neighborhood aspect and really will revitalize this area of the city, which will be awesome for that neighborhood. As you can see, there's going to be parking, access. There's going to be many pickleball courts, tennis courts, and many other things, as well as that component that I want to make sure that you notice the playground and pavilion and I believe a splash pad. And these items that I last mentioned is really the necessary component of your neighborhood park. And those are also something that Monroe truly has as far as assets, your neighborhood parks. And you have been able to get these playgrounds in, which I think is an awesome addition to your parks, to your neighborhood parks. Other highlights, and I will mention just a few, and I was looking at it today thinking, what order should I present this? And I decided to go geographically. So I'm going from west to east because I couldn't choose which one first. Munson Park, and I will not give you all the details. I know there's a lot of details in this plan. If you have questions, I'll gladly answer them. So the plan for Munson is really to keep that open atmosphere at the entrance, to change that entrance and create more of a natural looking, upgrade in your playground, including some adaptive ball fields, and creating more trails in the back and in the park in general. St. Mary's, creating this esplanade or river walk along the river is what we truly would like to achieve for that park. Soldiers and Sailors, expanding that and extending that river walk along the river and connecting this to the River Raisin National Battlefield Park. Also plans for your neighborhood parks and other pocket parks or River Raisin parks, and some of your parks that are not developed yet. So we have Millrace, we have Manor, and we have Capicelli here highlighted. And that's about it for the Parks and Rec plan. I hope that's enough for you, but I want to spend a little more time on your first citywide bicycle and pedestrian plan. So in 2020, voters approved a 15-year millage for roads and trails. And there's been a trail advisory committee, and actually I'm glad to see that Peter was able to make it tonight. Peter is the chair of the trail advisory committee, and Andrew was able to serve as well on that committee. And we've been meeting for about a year, going through this plan and trying to think about this and planning for a citywide system in order to make recommendations to you to consider. So there's been a lot of work done in here. And what I'm trying to really highlight is just a few things. Some of the key component to this was to make sure that this city is connected to a regional network. So let me highlight that regional network a little bit for you. But first, Monroe is truly unique both in itself and regionally, because not only it has access to many local parks, but it has access to a state park, to a national battlefield park, and to an international wildlife refuge. All within city boundaries and all within walking and bicycling distance from most city residents. Regionally, and when I look at the planning region that Monroe is part of, you can see that 7-county area, which includes all the way from Port Huron down to Monroe, and west to Livingston and Washtenaw, all the way to Detroit. You can see Monroe at the very bottom there, and notice that in terms of trail assets, there's a really big network of green trails that are all connected to the counties on the north of us. When we start looking at Monroe, we are disjointed. We're not connected to that system. We do have a regional trail, and that regional trail is recognized, and it is the River Raisin Heritage Trail. When we talk about the River Raisin Heritage Trail, I find a lot of people think of it differently. Most people associate the River Raisin Heritage Trail as the portion that's in Sterling State Park and connects to the battlefield. But this graphic here that I'm not even sure where it came from or who originated this is really telling, because it's more than that. It's a system, and it's from the state park all the way to Raisinville Road along Elm Avenue in North Custer. It is a system of trail, of sidewalks, of the North Custer Trail, and of simply paved shoulder when you talk about pedestrian and bicyclists. So it is not truly a complete mixed use or shared use trail, but it is a mixture of those sidewalks and trails. And perhaps that should be one of your priorities, making sure it is a trail. The other thing that's important is, for Monroe, is this vision of the Great Lakes Way. This has been an initiative that came out and is really would be the way that Monroe can view itself as connecting to the region. It is envisioned along the Lake Erie, and it is envisioned as both a land and a water trail that would connect all the way from Port Huron all the way to Toledo, really, and hopefully continue along Lake Erie. So it's a great opportunity for Monroe to be able to connect to both south and north. So as far as the regional context, and taking into account the Monroe Loop Trail that's also coming our way next year, which you see here on this graphic highlighted in yellow, you really have all these systems, and we're talking about the River Raisin Heritage Trail, the Loop Trail, the Great Lakes Way, and the River Walk. All of these are converging and are into your city. And we need to plan for them and to plan how we're going to connect them within your city. That was the challenge that we set out to do. In looking at each of those, you can see, for example, if you look at the River Raisin, and I'm going to invite you, you're looking at it, right? I didn't even realize that. The River Raisin Heritage Trail, you see the challenge that I was mentioning. In the center of town, it's a sidewalk. It's not really a trail for separate recreation trail, if you will, that's 10 feet wide. So there's a need to incorporate, and you also don't have bicycle accommodations, and that needs to be said. And I do ride there quite a bit myself, and you end up riding on a sidewalk because I'm way too scared to go on the road, frankly. So, but some people do ride on the road, and they are brave. If you look at the Monroe Loop Trail, it starts at Munson Park and ends at Rossler and Fifth. And continuing the Loop Trail and connecting it through to downtown, is something that was really, it's a need. And then there's the Great Lakes Way, and that's the one at the bottom. And it's a way, how do we bring that? And it's largely thought of at this point in time as being North Dixie and South Dixie as far as the route. How do we connect these and how do we bring people downtown? So if you look at that, the best way was to go in Winchester first and South Dixie, Monroe, South Dixie. That corridor seemed to be the best. As part of that effort, we did, and there was a survey. We did a survey of residents, and this was for both the parks and for the bicycle improvement plan. And we found out a few things, and those are there for you to see, and they're also in the report that you were distributed. But generally, people want bike lanes. That was pretty clear. They want bike lanes in certain places through downtown, but everywhere was something that I read quite a bit. Along the river, and on dedicated off-road path and protected bike lanes. I think most people want the safe way to do bicycling in town. We started looking at north-south corridors and east-west corridors, and just highlighting a few that were mentioned. And other things, other improvements that we could do too, bike racks, hiking trails, continuing to allow bikes on sidewalks. That goes also to speak about how safe it is to be in the road. There was quite a bit of that conversation in our committee to the end about how safe we felt about going on the road with on-street bicycle facilities. In other input, when we had a workshop in addition to the survey, and some of those really focus on priorities. What do you want to do first? Completing sidewalk gaps. We had outlined a few areas in the city where sidewalks would be needed. One thing I should say is our survey, I've never had as many responses in a survey as this. It was over 800 responses. A lot of those were from Monroe and Frenchtown Township, and others, and more than half was the city. So I took that in consideration. But it is clear that people come from the township to the city to walk and to bicycle. So you are catering to the region by making those improvements. And many of these people don't understand. They don't live in the city. That's really interesting. No, that's not really in the city. We can't put sidewalks in Frenchtown Township. Your challenge is really at the edge because you are, the city has sidewalk system, very few gaps. But when you look at Frenchtown and you look at Monroe, they don't have sidewalks. And a lot of times, particularly the way your city limits are very, they go in and out, it makes for gaps. So these are the gaps that we really see. I mean, Telegraph Road is number one. Everybody talks about that. And again, it's primarily those areas of Telegraph that are in Frenchtown and in Monroe Township. Stewart, so South Dixie, I mean, you can see that all of these are in the edge of town. As far as bike lanes, people want them everywhere, really, like I said, but North Dixie, South Dixie, Monroe Street, the Monroe Loop to downtown. I mean, those were things that people mention and that we retain. Elm from Telegraph to Dixie Highway, Front from Telegraph to downtown, and La Plaisance. We set out some goals and objectives, and I want to touch upon that. Is first, we really need to develop that network. We need to establish a bicycle and pedestrian network. And bicycle is really the focus because you have your sidewalks. Second, we need to think of complete streets. And by that term, we mean streets that can accommodate all users, not only motorists, but pedestrians and bicyclists and handicap and all others. So we need to shift the thinking. Roads are not only for cars, they're for everyone. And that's a culture change. We talked a lot about that in our committee. And it's also anytime that there's a road improvement project, we need to think about how to incorporate bicyclists, pedestrians, and all other users, as well as making the street a safe place. Number 3, regulations and enforcement. Incorporating this plan into your other plans. That's important. Into your process of looking at road improvement project, into your ordinances, and into your other plans. By the way, going back to complete streets, part of this plan we came up with a resolution, which we hope you will adopt for a complete streets policy resolution. That's on the end of the report. 4th, education and encouragement. Encouraging bicycling and walking in the city. Of course, that's what we want. We want to make it easier and safer for people to walk and bicycle, and to promote this as for a healthy lifestyle. I think this is really important, and you see all great cities around our nation having a great deal of bicycle improvements and bike lanes. And it's not only a way to encourage a healthy lifestyle, it's also a great way to attract and retain the young generation. So I see this as a great economic development boost for the city. Lastly, funding and in coordination. We really want to ensure that we can implement this plan. We wanted to create a plan that could be carried to. Part of our task was to look at best practice, and I would like to highlight a few things, because when we start looking at how to accommodate bicyclists on the road, we need to really think what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, what's the standard, and we need to be in agreement with the way those are set. If you look at the graphic at the lower left, that really tells you there's many different types of users. There are those that will never be comfortable riding on the road. There are those that are in the middle that can, if there's some facilities. For me, I might be safe. Or if I see other people doing it, I'm going to do it too. And then there's a highly confident. That's not a great percentage of those people, of this. If you look at the whole, they have a higher tolerance. They're not scared. But there's not only the bicyclists, there's the walkers. In Monroe, you have a lot of walkers. And they walk for exercise, they walk their dog, or they walk for health and for just recreation. And there are others, there's scooters now. So we need to make sure the scooters can go through town in a way that's appropriate. As far as types of facilities, they come from many angles. The first one is no improvement whatsoever. And that's appropriate in certain areas, not in the city, primarily on rural roadways, where there's very low traffic, and that is safe if you have a little place. Hopefully, there's a little bit of a paved shoulder, which makes it safer because you have a dedicated space if you're right on the roadway. But in cities, we start thinking about accommodating bicycles with bike lanes. And those have to be a certain width. And sometimes you mix parking with car traffic and bike lanes in a graphic that I just showing. There are different ways to make that safer. Rather than just having a straight bike lane, is to have protected bike lanes. And they come up with ideas all the time about making this better, but it takes more room. So we have to be cognizant of that. Buffered bike lanes in the upper left. There's bike lanes on the right there. You see with some kind of, I don't know how you call that anymore, but it's a barrier that allows you some more separation, and also some planters or just strictly a buffer. You notice that you have a buffered bike lane. The buffer is in between the traveling cars and the bike lane, and then you have the parking lane. In the example in the lower one, you see there's parking a buffer and then the bike lane. And so there's two types of protected bike lanes in that sense. And really, if you look at the protected bike lane on the sidewalk, it's an extension of the sidewalk. And that could be something you could imagine from Monroe, Monroe Street. Wouldn't that be wonderful? In addition to those protected areas for designated bicycles, there are areas where there's just no room for accommodating this. So you could think of a system that has bike lanes, but say when you come to an intersection where there's a need for a turning lane, it becomes a shared lane situation. And those are accepted as far as standards. And that the symbol that you see on the pavement that's what it is. It's a sharrows. It's a shared lane marking. And then there's the tops of the tops, which is the shared use path. And those have to be a certain width to meet federal guidelines, and those 10 feet. And you have that. You have in the lower right is really what's a picture it's showing State Park. Whoops, I didn't mean to go that. In addition to on-street bicycle facilities, there's also other things you need to think about when you start looking at bicycle improvements. And it is crosswalks, signage, and all those other amenities that need to happen also around the city, and bike racks, bike stops and bike station, and the fix-it station that you have in many places in the city right now. So these were a little bit about standards. Now I'm going to talk about the plan itself. And the first thing we did is look at what we have. And so that graphic here, that plan, is really what you have in terms of existing sidewalks. And you do see that you have a great deal in Monroe. As far as bikeways and shared use path, you do have some, and those are highlighted in red here. The shared use path are in red, and in blue are your bikeways. So within city limits, you really have a bike lane on North Dixie and Detroit Avenue, as you may know, and then on North Custer. There are paved shoulders outside of town coming into town, and that's what you see over here. Those are along M50, Monroe Street, and North Dixie. And then you have your river walk and the Monroe Loop Trail highlighted in red as if it's existing. It is almost existing. The plan, the proposed bikeways, and I have the plan itself is in two pieces. So the first one is the bikeways. So what you see in bolder blue is what we are proposing. We're proposing to connect the dots, really. Connect the N and make sure the system is continuous and interconnected. As far as shared use path, we are anticipating what other plans have proposed, as well as connecting dots again. So you have planned for a shared use path along Telegraph, and so that's shown here. You also have plans for a greenway in the River Raisin Heritage Corridor East Master Plan, and that's highlighted here. The other ones are part of connecting those opportunities that I mentioned about a little while ago, is along Elm Avenue, and finalizing and continuing that loop, the Monroe Loop, downtown both and on Rossler. So we looked at how that could be accommodated and the recommendations and how we can implement those within your existing street system. And so we measured the street and looked at how we can put those protected bike lanes on your existing roadways. So just a few examples: West Front, East First, and South Macomb all can accommodate protected bike lanes and two travel ways. this has a trade-off that's pretty obvious to everyone here, I'm sure, is that we have to remove the parking on those streets. And we have to say there's no on-street parking along those arteries. Recommended shared lanes or sharrows in addition to the existing sidewalks are in those places where we don't have the space, or in those places where the traffic is so low and the speed are so low that it's safer to do so. So downtown is really right now thought of as a shared lane situation. And then Noble Street also is thought of that way. What's happening downtown, I think, is going to be rethought in the future, a very near future, I hope, in terms of rethinking the one-ways in the two-way situation. And when you do get there, I think it'll be incumbent with this complete streets mentality to think about how are we going to incorporate bike lanes or make it safer for bicyclists to go through our downtown. Also, there are areas where we can and should afford to have both bike lanes and shared use path. There are people that will never, as I said a little while ago, that will never go on the street on a bicycle. They just are not comfortable to do so. So I think that we need to have situations where we offer both a shared use path along the edge of the road as well as a on-street bicycling so that you can have that happening. You also need to think about that in particularly, I'm thinking of your Riverways and Heritage Trail in terms of offering that continuous trail from the state park all the way to the Monroe Loop, et cetera, and to make that complete wide trail use. And in fact, if you could afford 12 feet, that would be awesome. But many areas you won't have that width. So you should think about 8 at least, more than just your strict 5-foot concrete. That way you can have a mixture of use and you can have the greater use of both pedestrian and bicyclists mixed that you would want, because what we're trying to do is attract people here. So those situations where there's both bike lanes and shared use path along Elm, and they are connecting Rossler to the loop, both north and south of the river, connecting yeah, that's what I'm showing. In addition, there's a shared use path. And we started looking at how do we connect the loop downtown. The loop generally follows on the south of the river an old railroad bed. And as it come in town, there's Woodcraft Square that's in the way, so we go around that. And then the idea would be to continue on Fifth and then connect on that greenway, and it would be the Loop Greenway through town. And the city owns many of those properties already. And what you see here is a graphic that would show how this can be incorporated within the existing system. And so this is a project that we're actually considering for going for a grant, a Spark grant, DNR Spark grant next week, and would love to submit for the city. Finally, I did talk about this too. The Telegraph Road and Monroe Street are part of other plans. We didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that because this has already been thought about, and there is a plan for a shared use path on Telegraph Road, both south and north of the river, and which would be largely on the west side and then cross over at Holiday Boulevard and go then east to go north. And hopefully both Monroe and Frenchtown will come along with this plan and continue this both north and south. Monroe has been, there's an option out there to create a bike lane there, and this is really what our committee really would like to see. is accommodation of bicycles on Monroe Street. You will recall that there is a paved shoulder. MDOT has done an extra wide shoulder north of town, north of Stewart. So bringing in this bicycle through town is part of the plan. You see the example here shown, is parking, then there's a bike lane, there's the travel ways. What we'd like to actually see is the bike lane against the sidewalk, the idea of having the protected bike lane close to the pedestrian, then to have a buffer, then to have parking. This supposes you're on board for reducing the number of lanes through downtown, and this would be, in my opinion, a great thing to do for Monroe. So our priorities, and I've got only 3 slides, and I hope I'm not taking too much of your time. And first is to create those bikeways through town, connecting the dots.
Excuse me, could you go back to that previous picture you had up there?
Sure,
You got Monroe Street.
that is Monroe Street.
Okay. Currently Monroe Street has got two lanes going north, 2 lanes going south, and a turn lane.
Yes.
Now, you're proposing, if I understand and I read this correctly, you're proposing that there would be only 1 lane going north and south. You would have a turning lane in the center. You would have a bikeway, and you'd still have a parking lane. Is that correct?
That is what's shown here. That's part of the downtown plan. But what I'm suggesting is that we reverse the parking lane and the bike lane so that the bike lane is against the sidewalk. Then you have a buffer. Then you have a parking lane. Then you have your 3-lane roadway, which is the
So
center turn lane.
you're trading 4 lanes, 4 drive lanes for 2.
Correct. The idea is not to move traffic faster. The opposite.
Well, I can assure you, with 2 lanes, you're gonna slow traffic down.
Yes. And in fact, it was pointed,
Is that what your intent is, or the intent is?
the intent is to accommodate bicycles. I don't know, so it was pointed to us during our work during the year. At one point, you had a lane that it was narrowed for some work that happened in the city. Was it a water main? On the bridge. And traffic was moving fine. It was pointed out to us that everything was going very well. People slowed down, but they still moved through. That center turning lane, and really it becomes a critical to think of your intersection to make sure that the turning movement there flow. But if you're able to keep that travel lane moving in this, by providing that turning lane both at intersection, then there's a flow. The flow is going. So many places have done this. This is something we can look at in terms of determining where it makes sense. And it may not be all the way from Stewart to, say, Jones. We may think of this as strictly where we want to slow traffic. So we'll have to think carefully where this is appropriate for Monroe. Where does it begin? Where does it end? And how it transition beyond where it ends.
Okay, currently I'm on Front Street there, in front of the old Kresge building.
Yes.
Okay, you've got traffic going west, and you've got 2 lanes going north and 2 lanes going south.
Yes.
And certain times of the day, you got all kind of hell of congestion in there.
Yes.
With 4 lanes right now. Now, you're saying that if nothing changes, if the traffic pattern doesn't change, the traffic on Front Street going west, that you're going to minimize congestion by going from 4 to 2 lanes? Or there's not going to be any different?
I'm not saying I'm going to minimize congestion.
So
I've never said that. What I'm saying is what we're trying to do is keeping the traffic moving. So that's all I'm saying.
If I might just interject, we're already looking at right now scoping with OHM Advisors engineering firm to do a traffic analysis to consider the two-way traffic along Front and First Street that Lucy had mentioned, but also part of that's going to look at the Monroe traffic as to what it would look like with a single lane, whether, what level of service that would fall into under, transportation. I mean, it runs from A being the best to F, failure. And so, we are going to look at that and see how that traffic model would work. And so we probably will have that before the city council here in the next month or so, I'm guessing, if not the first meeting in January to initiate that. And it is contained in the CIP analysis with the DDA fronting some money in the city as well. So part of it is just intuitively, sometimes you think that by having fewer lanes, that sometimes the traffic, the movement of zigging in and out slows traffic down. Sometimes you just got a straight pipeline; it moves efficiently. But we'll know better once we get the traffic model and see how that would work. The other thing with it is slowing the traffic down is, and again, I've heard you kind of talk a little bit about our downtown, but on Monroe Street, one of the problems is trucks coming down through Monroe, which we can't stop. It's a state trunk line, but the speed basically reverberates through all those buildings there. If you slow it down a little bit, it may make it a little more pedestrian oriented. So, but to your point, we're actually going to look at it and see what the traffic flow would be, and we'd have to, because it is a state trunk line, to get MDOT's approval before we would consider it.
Okay,
Right.
there's an accident on La Pleasance and I-75. Either way, it doesn't make any difference if it's northbound or southbound. Now you've got that traffic, that interstate traffic off of 75 on Monroe Street or 125 from Summit or from Erie Road. And have you taken that into consideration?
Well, if I had my choice, I know it's not my choice, I would make Telegraph the truck route. Don't you think that would be better?
Well, we've experienced that too. I mean, there's times where we've had those situations, and we know what it's like on all of
We do.
these north-south streets through the city of Monroe. How much it'd be exacerbated by going from 2 lanes to 1 lane. Again, hopefully we'll know a little bit more when we do the traffic model.
So the other thing that in line with the modeling is the beauty. We're not changing the curb here. We're not doing anything but painting on the pavement. And I think there are ways now that we can actually try things out. So there might be a way that we just try things out. If it doesn't work, we can change it. But we can at least try something different. See if it works, see if it creates too much congestion, see if we can live with it, see how people react to it. There will be reaction, no questions. But I do think that there's ways to implement some of these changes in a way that can be trying it out and seeing if it works and adjusting and learning from what we try. But if we don't try anything, we're not changing, and I don't think that's good either. So just moving on. I just want to focus on the recommendations of the plans. And number one priority we decided was really to create those bikeways, connecting those bikeways to get together and creating a city system that's interconnected for bicyclists to be able to use. Number 2, 3, and 4, as far as priorities, is those share use path development. 2, we decided the Monroe Loop Greenway was really the number 2 project that we wanted to come along. Number 3 was connecting that Riverwalk to National Battlefield Park. And then 4 was that Rossler connection that we could achieve by making those sidewalks wider along the side and created the short loop that would be a continuous recreation trail for people to use. So that's it as far as my presentation. I do want to say that I will be coming back both to the Plan Commission and City Council in January. This is just the first approach, and as part of the recreation plan submittal, we need to have a public hearing. We need to have resolutions in place. So I will be back before you to talk about this. And there is also a public review process that's starting this week for a whole month. You're welcome to have comments to Vince and to us, and that we could make changes. This is just a draft. That's it. So I'm opening it up to any questions or conversation or comments.
Mr. Pastor, before we get started, and Chairman Schwartz may have questions or for his commission as well. Are you looking for questions and answers at this time? I mean, it's on the board here, but I know from timeline for this evening, just a general view versus, I'll say the details of working it out, but there's a lot of information here. It's many pages, 130 some pages. That this part alone with the bicycle and trails, it's, I really appreciate some of the information because I like how you at least showed how those systems would be presented on existing streets and existing conditions. How they work out is through the discussion and implementation through I'll just say, phases, as you said, what's the priority and what's next. And also in here, I know we didn't go through all this, but there's a page that has the, project improvement schedule. What is the short term? What is the medium term? What is long term? There's some that are going to be further out to do, and there's some that are maybe a little more achievable in a short sense. So Vince, I'm not sure that you're looking for at this point, but I want to at least give, if there's any immediate thoughts, if that's what you're looking for.
I think if there's any questions, for clarity, tonight was just the intent was to, okay, here it is. As Lucy indicated, there's still going to be another public hearing with the Planning Commission in January, which we would look for a recommendation. And then also the City Council has to hold a public hearing as well before it's adopted in late January. So, but, if there's questions, there's certainly, or clarification, certainly I think would entertain any if that was the case.
So this is being the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I mean, again, it's 130 some pages long. I think there's 60 that are in the Trails Plan alone, approximately. There's a lot to read, not only for the council, but for the commission before those next meetings. I have some questions and thoughts, but I also will looking forward to those as I read through this in more detail. There's a quick review. Like I said, I do appreciate that it showed examples how it would be. Some of the conversations that were here tonight I recall back a few years, we had similar conversations when it was a similar proposal. I think there's things that are much more been implemented elsewhere to see how they do work out those details from managing traffic to I would say emergency circumstances and all that. So I appreciate the work done. I don't know if there's any thoughts from, I'll say council, and I'll leave it to Commissioner Schwartz. We may have some comments for the board. No?
I like the plan. It's good to bring it out and start talking about it. I know we've talked about this multiple times. It's good to see it moving forward. I don't know if anybody has any other comments from the commission.
I got another, excuse me.
I do.
Well, hold on, sir. This is for the commissions. Go ahead, sir.
Commissioner Zager?
Yes. There's a lot of effort to support and to accommodate walkers and cyclists. And I know there's a lot of walkers out there. How was it determined that there was a demand by cyclists in terms of numbers that would we would want to fund the amount of paths, I'll call them just paths, for cyclists? Now, was a study done that says, oh hell, there's 500 bike cyclists a day that utilize the pathway on North Custer, from Rossler to Munson and vice versa. So how was that determined? How was that determined, the need for the amount of pathways that you are proposing, that you're recommending?
Okay. Well, I talked about the public input, the survey that we did, and we also did a workshop. Those were, over 800 responses. So that was phenomenal for Monroe. I've done many surveys around the area, and I can tell you that this is the most I've ever seen. There is a demand out there. There is a public demand for more pathways and for more safer places to bicycle. That is clear to me. I don't have exact numbers, but you hear it everywhere, and you hear people wanting it everywhere. I know that I do personally, but it wasn't accommodating me here. It was accommodating the demand out there. Not only that's important because your residents want them, but it's also a way to make your city more attractive for people to stay, live, recreate, and to retain talent, to retain the young people that are going to Chicago, New York, other places because they have those accommodations. So I see this as something that's needed for Monroe to be what it wants to be.
Please don't get the impression I'm against this recreation plan.
No.
I am. I'm very, very positive when it comes to recreation. I just want to be convinced that what you're proposing or what the
Recommendations.
are supported.
They are.
Because I'm not going to stamp it. Oh hell yes, let's build 10 miles or 15 or 20 miles of bike paths.
The other point I want to make is creating those bike lanes is cheap. It's not like doing shared use path. It's paint on pavement.
Okay.
So that's something that I think is worth mentioning because I don't think it's going to cost you or it's going to be a great deal of investment.
That's what I heard today after my wife came back from Hobby Lobby. She said 70% discount on things going on at Hobby Lobby. You don't realize how much money I save.
I just have, I guess, follow-up, because there's many here that serve in different boards and commissions and SEMCOG, and I hear from a regional, from Southeast, and the changes from the state. So there's significant movement, but there's movement that's been ongoing here in the county. I know Florence Buchanan is with us this evening. She managed the meetings of the Monroe County Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. It's looking at it from a countywide perspective. They've drafted a 100-mile loop that's being proposed throughout the entire county, but you have to get through the communities to be able to get that unless you're going to bypass. So those are, there's not just organized bicyclists, but I'll say the recreational bicyclists that are in it. So I think there's a lot of information today, and this is a plan. I always say they're concept plans, because when you get a plan, there's a lot of information here, and then you have to choose as a body, whether it be the planning commission or the council, on funding and things, what is going to make the best and biggest impact in relation to non-motorized. And it may not be everything that's on every page here, but that's why there's short-term, mid-term, long-term. Some of these are going to be significant, there's no question, if they were to come to fruition. But how do you get there, and what can we do as kind of the wins to see, is the use there before you go through the entire. You just don't start and do the entire plan from beginning to end in the first year. That's not going to happen. It's what can be managed to see the participation, see the use as we continue to develop it. I think Councilman Lamore, Brian, you have something?
Yeah, I do, Your Honor. Going back to Mr. Ziegler's comment regarding the log jam through Monroe Street, he is absolutely correct on that. When the highways close down, it just becomes a log jam. Whether we have a truck route down Telegraph or not doesn't make any difference. People ignore it. I think what we have to do is also involve our public safety department. And when there's situations out on the highway, maybe they can accommodate the truckers, whoever, to go in a different route. Just a thought.
No, that's a great thought. And in fact, it should be in concert with other, traffic is really important. That's a good comment. Thank you.
If there's other comments, and then we have a couple more presentations yet this evening. And then again, this is just the presentation this evening. As Lucy mentioned, there'll be meetings both at the Planning Commission and the council, as well as public hearings for the public comment as well. I know that there's been an opportunity up front, and of course, people that are listening today may have take the opportunities to share information along the way as well. So, Andrew, I'm sorry, Councilman.
Yeah, I just wanted to. No, Andrew's fine too. That really works. I just wanted to thank Lucy and the rest of the committee members on the advisory committee for taking the time and putting this whole thing together and volunteering their time in those meetings to be able to have those discussions. And I think that they've begun to set us up some options here that we can continue discussing and make adjustments as needed for the future. But I just wanted to acknowledge the time that they put into this to get us to this point.
Very well. Thank you, Lucy. Mr. Pastu?
Thank you, Your Honor. The next item we have is the presentation with the proposed capital improvements program. I think it's the slides are being pulled up here. Last, I guess actually earlier this year, because of COVID, we did the presentation later than normal, but Chairman Schwartz said, I'd like us to, if we could, to get back to having the departments present their proposed projects. And we had done that for a number of years and then got away from it, I think, during the COVID period. And so we've restored that tonight. There's a total of, I believe, 68 slides, of which if we spend no more than 45 seconds on for each of them, we'll get through this within the hour, and allow for some questions. But I know they're looking to pull that up here shortly. Oh, okay. But, while they're doing that, also, I'd like to thank Caitlin for sure as kind of shepherding the capital improvements process, along with Mark Cochran with community development, but also all the department heads along that. We still have Mr. Sell with us, our Assistant City Manager, Finance Director, with all of the changes and cost overruns we've had with projects and moving things around. He's been very good to work with, but we've put him under a lot of stress to make sure we can our capital improvements program out. So, but they did a lot of work, and when I get rolling on my introduction here, which looks like it's on the screen now, although it's not popping up on ours here in front of us, so. Does it? Okay. All right, thank you. With that, next slide, I'll just do a brief agenda. I'll give you some background. Captain Director Tolstead will do the public safety presentations. Mark Cochran will do economic community development, which will also include parks. Barry Leroy, utilities, and then Patrick Lewis with engineering. Mark's going to cover the next steps in the process for the capital improvements program afterwards, and then if there's any questions, comments related to that. So, next. Factors in developing the CIP process, certainly you've seen these in the past, but certainly if there's financial considerations, the planning horizon, and I'll expand upon that in just a minute, related to the DTE plant and their significance as being our primary property owner and great impact on our taxable value. Quality of life, much what was talked about with parks and with the trails that Lucy alluded to, phenomenally important in our long-term sustainability within the city. We also look at operational impacts. We do asset management, particularly with utilities and also with streets. There's regulatory considerations, technology, and I'll be honest with you, the add-ons here are system capacity. One of the things in considering it is the number of architects and engineers, contractors, supply chains, and staff issues. There's so much project and money taking place out there right now. There's projects that, while we may be able to afford at this point in time. The resources to carry it out are not there, and so we've ended up pushing some stuff into later in the years. And then all these, and I should put employee, but also visitor safety as well are considerations in developing the CIP. Financial factors, again, this one's been here on a regular basis. I took the liberty to highlight it again. In the past, it was the DTE Tax Tribunal settlement, of which, when we went through that, we were looking at a $2.2 million reduction in our general fund. The good news, we're going to get through that, but now, in this last month, the DTE submitted their plan to the Michigan Public Services Commission and indicated that they're looking to start decommissioning 2 of their 4 units at the coal plant beginning in 2028. The significance of it is, as planners, you look at 10, 20, 5-year plans. Our planning horizon is pretty short now, particularly in light of that. So as much infrastructure as we can address within this period of time while they have it. And just so you understand, there was a time they were almost 50% of our tax base. They're down to 42. Next year it falls to 40. So you can see where, the precipitous decline is and the effect that it'll have. The other financial factors, which 2 years ago, the voters approved a $2 million levy for streets, sidewalks, and trails, of which was a great blessing for the quality of streets and addressing many of our infrastructure needs. And then right now, there's a lot of funding out there. We use some of the federal ARPA money, but also other state, federal programs, private foundations, and then local government partners that we can work with on capital projects. Quality of life factor, again, the 2 that we talked about just here a few minutes ago is invest in parks and trail development. They really are the quality of life. And again, I think long-term, something important from a sustainability standpoint. Public art, you'll see some funding in there to start the process, but again, it's an integral part of a dynamic community. Infrastructure to serve community events, more and more. We've had a very good year with different programs and projects, with events, and, we're looking to continue to expand upon it. As Lucy alluded to at number 4, we still have to build upon our unique historic assets here in the community. And then we've got the River Raisin itself, natural beauty, but it creates recreational opportunities, and it is addressed in the Parks Master Plan. Continue to invest in more walkable community, and then streetscape traffic calming improvements where possible. Other factors, consideration to improve our operational efficiency and effectiveness. Part of that goes built into some of the aspects of the capital improvements program. Always considering customer experience and how we can make improvements in that area. Obviously, take into consideration what the operating costs. Okay, if you build it, can you maintain it? Those are all considerations with that. And then you're always looking at other funding alternatives to go along with these projects. As I mentioned in the past, and again, the infrastructure asset management mandated for water and sewer. Mr. Lewis does an annual assessment of not only the streets, but also sidewalk evaluation, Parks and Rec Master Plan, which includes the bicycle and pedestrian, are elements of taking a snapshot, an assessment of where we are and how we can plan to make necessary improvements. And it's an important tool to prioritize projects, replacement versus capital maintenance, extend the useful life of an asset, but also coordination with surface and underground projects going along with that. Regulatory factors, primarily going to be utilities, water system, heavy emphasis with the state on reliability and redundancy, PFAS, ongoing monitoring of that. And then our sewer system that we are involved with Monroe and Frenchtown Township. We have a consent corrective action plan with our NPDS, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, that we have to address, and those are incorporated into the projects themselves. Technology factors, again, always looking to improve operational efficiency, customer experience, system reliability, and safety as well. The information technology study from probably about 4 years ago, improve our process management and workflow systems, which have been taking place. We have numerous applications and improvements that have taken in the utility system from metering all the way to collection over the last few years. Cybersecurity, big item now, and part of any kind of capital planning that goes along with it. And then there has been integration of cameras in the downtown area and looking to expand in other areas as well, not only for purposes of security, but also just also points of interest, particularly if there's events and what have you. For this upcoming year, fiscal year 23-24, we're looking at a little over $15.6 million in projects through the various. One of the things that you'll see in there, Mr. Green, former Community Development Director, working with Mayor Clark, we've been identified some projects with cemetery perpetual care funds to improve the cemetery. And then also there's a couple projects out there with from a funding source. You can see where the sources are, but various with some state, federal fund. Mostly that's going to be the airport. There's a little over $2 million there. Mr. Lewis will talk a little bit about that. The municipal street fund, which is the 2 mil levy, is an integral part now of our capital improvements program, and then the water, wastewater funds being others. Some of the projects are going to be financing contingent, such as some installment equipment purchases that are contained in the proposed CIP. This is an old capital improvements program, and what I like to do is real quickly is say why this is important. We do an assessment of our city facilities. We've done a lot of improvements with City Hall, police station. While the millage or the bond issue proposal did not pass, we did the analysis regarding the need for it. Fire stations, obviously we have the new one on East 3rd Street, but you'll also see some maintenance-related items for the station on North Custer. The Opportunity Center, Navarre Library, we've received $7.8 million from the state of Michigan toward that project, which is still in the planning phase. We have the Battlefield Education Event Center to consider, Sawyer House, and then also Dorsch Library. All of these have had improvements in the recent past. This is the one I actually like to show because in presenting this a few years ago, road street funding, identified major streets eligible for federal funding aid, state trunk line, although I changed it this year and put telegraph is getting in bad shape, but that's a state highway issue, and city bridges. These are all in pretty good condition and are financially sustainable, which is important. The next one will show you that where we were just 3 years ago, funding challenges, local streets, sidewalks, alleys, industrial park off of Turnus, and St. Mary's Garden. At this point, there's been a lot of positive development with the street projects that have taken place the last couple of years. We're now incorporating more sidewalk replacement. We've identified gaps to fill with our bicycle and pedestrian plan. Alleys, we haven't done anything. But the industrial park off of Turnus, we've spent over $2 million to bring that up to a standard that's no longer embarrassing for the businesses out there. And then we've got St. Mary's Garden storm sewer improvements, which will start here within the next month or so to address a pretty significant problem related to that. The significance of it is we went through the CIP process and come up with a plan to address what we knew to be challenges here in the community. And then you'll see this last one here is the future capital appropriations. Got a lot next year, 24-25, a couple of really major projects, and we'll hit briefly on those with the departmental presentations. And then I think that concludes what I have as far as what's not included. The St. Mary's Garden Storm Sewer Project, over $7 million. Father Carnes, almost just a little bit under $4 billion. The Navarre Library Opportunity Center, $7.8 million. Finishing up the completion of the Lazy Boy headquarter redevelopment. Overall, it's about $3 million in there. There's some projects with River Raisin National Park. We just had a bid opening for new HVAC HVAC system. And then the Port of Monroe is from a couple of appropriations, one being in excess of, I believe, $11 million, along with other state appropriations, $5 million that they've had for improvements there. That's not included in here, but significant within the city itself. And then I think that concludes what I have. So as we go through this, just wanted to give you a quick overview, and then we'll go into the department projects. First up, if we could have Director Tolsted go through his. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Just have a few CIP projects to present to you tonight and explain to you what we're looking for here in the next CIP, and then about a year out as well. Am I supposed to use a clicker? Hold on. Beautiful. There you go. So you see here, the small picture in the upper right-hand corner is the West Side Station 2. Back when Chief White kind of set this project in motion a couple years ago to do some improvements to maintain this building here. So we had the garage door put in, hence you see the white garage door up there. We're actually having the deck placed in there now. But some of the things we ran onto as we started completing this project, one, it was very difficult to get someone to come out and give us estimates. And two, more importantly than that, it was the expenses. So just to give you a quick example, it was put in there about $3,000 to paint the bay. As you can see up there now, the price we just received to paint the bay and the garage door is $14,200. So some of the expenses of which we put in there, like the shed, we put in $5,000 about a year ago. Those are now going for about $7,500. So we encumbered. We still have about $26,000 encumbered from the 21-22 CIP. Looking for an additional about $32,000 to complete all these projects in the coming years. Also, most of the council members here, I believe I met with regarding the replacement of the SCBA's. This was last year. This is something we knew which was coming. The SCBA self-contained breathing apparatuses are a life safety equipment for the firefighters and for the public safety officers. So currently 50%, we have 20 of them designated for the fire department of our size. 10 of them will be out of warranty within a year. The expenses start gathering up as you're fixing out of warranty equipment such as this. In less than 1.5 years, 6 more will go out of warranty. 1 is completely, we cannot repair it. And then 3 within about 6 years. So recommending that we replace all 20 at once. And the reason for the recommendation to replace all 20, and why don't we just add a few more in and replace some of the ones that are going out of warranty, is the equipment has changed, things have updated. Anything dealing with life safety equipment, you don't want 2 different systems to operate in multiple ways. So it goes off of muscle memory. That's where we're looking to replace all of them at once. The new ones, I had the firefighters look through it. I'm like, you guys look at these, tell me which ones you like. Which ones would best service our needs. And they came back with the SCBA's for this quote that you're seeing up above. These also have a lifetime warranty practice with them. And then again, the new technology, that it's best practice to have all these SCBA's working in the same way. Next item up here is the accident investigation team equipment. Currently, the accident investigation team, if you think of what these police officers do, is when they're called out to mostly tragic scenes, when somebody is injured or a fatality as a result of a motor vehicle accident, of a railroad accident, these officers are trained. They go through an initial 2-week school and have continuing training as well to investigate these accidents, basically to determine to determine cause and contributing factors within any accident within the city of Monroe. The current software we have is out of date. The current hardware is unsupported and out of warranty. The computer we're using for it also, if we were to go buy some new software, hardware, doesn't handle when we would need a new equipment. We check with IT concerning that. And this requires multiple people to operate what we currently have. So you see the recommended replacement of all hardware and software, because if this were to go down, this system would go down. We don't have a replacement system for it, and it cannot be repaired. The software is not supported any longer. So you look at some of the cost there. It is costly for this equipment. The training is one area where we may be able to cut costs. I've already spoken with Sheriff Goodenough, who is also looking to go to the same system, and we could share the cost of that training. So you can cut out about $2,700 roughly with this project. This also can cut down the cost of overtime, because most of the time these accidents do not occur, incidents do not occur when we have sufficient staffing to investigate these things. They occur after hours. We have to call in multiple members. This device can actually be used, and all this equipment used with one person. So the estimated project cost on that is $22,000. And I have had discussions with the city manager regarding being able to use possible drug forfeiture funds as opposed to a CIP on this. Next project is the taser. So currently all sworn officers do have, with the exception of one, have a taser issued to them. Half of them, 11 of them, are unsupported and out of warranty. There's no software or hardware updates available to them. So if they break, they're not going to fix them. So we're looking to replace the ones that are out of warranty and out of date with the current one, which half our department currently has. So they're upgraded models, they're warranted. They're improved technology, which is a smart tech pulse rate. So this was explained to me by the persons who oversee this project. It's the older models have a different pulse rate than the new ones. It's much more controlled. It's advanced technology. The technology also that's powered on and recording. So current tasers, the older model, if it's fired, it will record that activity. It won't record your activity if you just turn it on. These new ones record activity, turn it on, which can help us prevent false claims, be able to track activity. So anytime you turn that taser on, that's a recorded activity within the taser. Also, there's a potential to work in concert with our body-worn cameras, which will be the next project I present to you, and how that would operate. So this project, estimated project cost about $22,000. So the body-worn cameras, this is actually looking for in the following year CIP projects. So our current licenses, we use provisions for our body-worn cameras and in our cars. Those all licenses will expire in about November of 2024 is when we last looked. I might be off a year there, my apologies. But when these expire, we'll be looking to replace them with something. We looked into the Axon body-worn cameras, and when I say they can work in concert with one another, so if you take out your taser and the taser's turned on, it'll activate the body camera. So this prevents split-second type activity by the police officers who would have to react very quickly. Be able, okay, I turn my body camera on, now I have to pull my taser. This all works in concert with one another. They would activate the body camera, activate the car camera. In addition to that, they also have technology with Axon that if the officer even pulls their weapon, it would activate the body-worn camera as well. So all this cost includes, it's used for both police and fire. We'd be able to get helmet cams for some of the firefighters as well, put cameras back, working cameras back into the fire engines. And there is a cost savings with this if you think of considering the reliability of such software and hardware for the officers today. It's must-needed technology for officers today. And a neat factor, I did find out the Axon 3, this is the price you see above here, actually has availability to live stream. So if an officer has their camera turned on, someone can log into the computer and actually watch a live stream of that activity. So the estimated project cost for that is about $388,000, and that would cover all vehicles, all body-worn cameras for the officers as well.
Excuse me, what is that redaction? Go back to the previous slide. What is redaction software?
So if those didn't, redaction software is for, so when somebody asks for a video from police officer, we can't just give them all the video that's on the body-worn camera. Things get redacted out of there. Blurred faces. If you ever watch some police video or other thing, they'll blur faces, blur out certain things like license plate, things where people have an expectation or right to privacy. That becomes a part of this program as well. So we don't have a third-party vendor where we had to buy the redaction software. Currently, redacting videos within law enforcement has taken up a lot more time than I think most police chiefs has anticipated just about within the last 5 years. So this would be incorporated with that.
So you can edit the activity that happened at a stop, for example.
Roughly.
If
That,
I'm an officer and I pull somebody over and I have them get out of the car, if there's something transpires between me and the driver of the car, I can edit that, that tape on that, software. I can,
well, I would propose to you, any video can be edited. This is no different than that what you're
that's
asking.
that's all I'm in asking, is that it can be edited and whatever you want to delete, you can delete.
I think the intent, though, is related to if you're at a domestic situation, for example, and there's kids there or whatever, you can blur that out. The intent is not to edit something out for a favorable. It's to protect.
Mr. Pastor, you know exactly what I'm talking.
I know what you're talking about,
You
and
know
I'm gonna.
exactly what this
but
is happening on a daily basis.
Well, I could tell you, it's,
Well, let me step in. I don't think edit is the correct word, because
No.
edit implies that you're removing for inappropriate reasons. The redaction software is to protect those that don't want to be seen or have a right to privacy. I understand your question is it can be edited or redacted. I think it's a matter of what the use is for, and I think I guess that'll be determined if it's used inappropriately. But I don't think it's to imply that it's being redacted for inappropriate use.
No, I wasn't implying that.
Yeah, and but others are.
But my only question was, does that mean that you can delete, you can edit whatever activity you want out of the video that was taken on a body cam?
Simply,
And in this case, that answers my question.
yeah. Simply put, yes.
Yeah, that answers
Okay.
my question. I'm not saying any one of our officers.
Right.
And when you were a troop, you
We didn't have body cameras back
didn't
when I
have
was
body camera.
We're on our own.
That was a long time ago.
It was. I'm dated. I know I'm dated. Councilman Felder, you had a question.
Yes, the accessibility for live streaming, I'm sure that comes with certain access limiting. That's a system that another officer back at the station would have to log into. That's not something that we make available to the public, certainly, right?
Correct. That was new technology just brought to my attention just recently, that it would be more prohibited, more restricted to administration for people who had to have a need and might be able to see live stream. It wouldn't be made available to the general public nor fellow officers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just wanted to clarify.
Councilman Viney?
That was a great question that Mr. Ziegler asked, because I would have never thought to ask it, because I've always been led to believe that body cameras cannot be altered in any way. So, as well as in-car cameras. So, am I being clear to understand that they can be altered, changed,
Yeah.
portions taken out?
So
and then
redaction has been a part of law enforcement since beginning. So
Yeah, I know.
when we speak of
The black
redaction,
line.
right? When you think of redaction like of a paper redaction, right? The videos work the same under the same principles. So you would redact private information that can't be allowed out to the general public. But the way the videos are given when we get FOIA requests. The videos are given in whole with redaction taken out of it, that people are not allowed. Where someone might have their expectation of privacy. But let's say that same video goes to court. So we oftentimes create duplicate copies for someone who may want that video. We'll redact certain things out of there. When I say redact, not edit or delete the video, blur faces, cut out certain amount of audio. Let's say you had your credit card statement within your house and an officer walks by that, you would want that blurred out, not made available to just anybody who FOIAs that request. That same video could be brought into court and all those redactions are removed. The blurs, anything like people talking, blurred faces, all those things are then brought to court and the video is seen in whole, not redacted or deleted, portions of it deleted out. It just would be made whole.
And is that chain of command through you as the director and the city clerk?
Correct. The city clerk does most of the redaction, if I'm not mistaken. We'll redact the videos and then provide them to the clerk.
Right, and for further clarification on the FOIAs, then we are required to give examples of the kind of information that has been redacted and the reasoning needs to fall under the law as to why it was redacted. So there's a checks and balance series on it. And the good thing about the police and the clerk's office working in partnership with each other, and then of course we involve attorney buds as well, is we do double check each other and we ask each other questions. Is this redactable under the law? Why are we redacting it, et cetera? So there is a check place in the system. And then either paper or video, it doesn't, it's not removed, it doesn't go away, it's just not visible. And as Director Tolstead said, it can be restored if necessary.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just real quick, is there a third-party oversight from the program that provides the actual camera pieces or the software?
So do we send, if I understand your question correctly, do we send, like, we have a video, someone requests that video, do we send it out to a third party to redact it?
Or does it automatically get uploaded, that type of thing, once it's removed or placed within your system?
So once a video is placed within the system, it gets uploaded. The body worn cameras, for example, we have now, gets placed into them. They're then downloaded into the system, which is so they'll remain there, and we follow the redaction periods that are set forth by the state. So the third party would be the provision that holds those videos, and then they become available to us.
That's
exactly
what I was getting to. Thank you.
Any other questions on it? All right. Last one is the police station. Mr. Pastu spoke about this briefly. We still have some deficiencies to address within the public safety program, which we believe the analysis of why a new police station was needed still need to be addressed, such as the joint administration, shared resources for the department, the undersize of the current facility which the police currently occupy, critical infrastructure improvements, increase operational effectiveness, modern technology, improve workspace, enhance community outreach, and expand training programs. This CIP project was still in there, is at $14.5 million as this future project.
Expand upon that a bit. Obviously, it was not approved by the voters this past November. Go back to the first slide. I talked about the planning horizon. With DTE and now their commitment to not only, recently with the tax tribunal settlement, but now the fact that they've indicated that they're going to start decommissioning 2 of the 4 coal-fired units. You literally have a window to get some of this infrastructure. This is a big piece, and literally, not to be melodramatic about it, but if you don't do it within the next few years, you're probably not going to do it in the next 40. And it's as simple as that. Clearly, you've got a facility that a good relationship with the sheriff's department and with the county, but when you do the space analysis, we're looking at about a little over 21,000 square feet based on today's, use of a police department of our size and level of activity. And right now we have 8,000 square feet, sharing another 3 with the sheriff's department. And so that's why, again, I'm recommending to put it in there, is you've got a short window in which to initiate this, but if you don't do it, it's going to be harder and harder in the future. And that's in part why I emphasized the planning horizon that you have, particularly for a big ticket item like this, is the window's closing and closing somewhat fast.
Okay, thank you.
Pastu?
Thank you, Your Honor. Next, Mr. Cochran with Community Development and also going through the parks.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council. So a few projects to go over through our department this evening. The first being, if you've been around City Hall campus, you've noticed over the past several years that there's significant brick damage in terms of the masonry walls along First Street, and also along the parking lot on the south side of the building, the public parking lot. And so taking a look at, we've gotten some quotes from Ohio Building and Restoration to start the repair for the masonry wall. Primarily, this has been caused due to snow removal, and so we're looking at opportunities in the future on how to more safely, with less damage, conduct snow removal in the area of the Lake Erie Transit bus stop to prevent this from happening in the future. But one of the projects is to do the masonry wall repairs around City Hall. And then also the first floor bathroom renovations here at City Hall, the 2 public restrooms, as well as the restroom that's right off the first floor conference room as well. They haven't been updated in a very long time. There's some plumbing repair that needs to be done for the toilet systems. And then also you'll notice some deterioration with the ceramic tiles in the bathrooms. And so we've got $40,000 included for upgrades to those bathrooms on the first floor of City Hall. Next is 2 projects that were submitted by the Downtown Development Authority to further the master plan that the DDA and the City Council has adopted. The first is to take a look at the 2-way conversions of First Street and Front Street, and then also the Monroe Street traffic calming and streetscape project that we saw earlier that was included with the Bike and Trail Pedestrian Master Plan. And so the DDA has submitted these 2 projects to further look at and design in the upcoming fiscal year.
Yes, Councilman Feller.
Thank you. Can we go back one, Mark? What portions of these projects would those funds correspond to?
So the 1-way to 2-way conversions for First and Front Street would be from Harrison to Macomb Street, where those streets are 1-way, converting those both back to 2-way streets.
Right, but you have a $1.2 million allocation on that total project. This right now is just $60,000. Is this for the plan?
Design phase.
Gotcha.
Yep.
In the same for Monroe Street as well?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, we've got in the Economic Development Division, we've got some funds requested for strategic property acquisition to further the River Raisin Heritage Corridor. As you know, we've made some significant progress with the DNR Trust Fund since 2014, and so we've got some funds scheduled or requested for $500,000 to continue property acquisition within the Heritage Corridor. And then also $300,000 for property acquisition to go along with the Telegraph Road corridor development plan as well that we've discussed with City Council in the past. Mr. Pastou alluded to this in his opening presentation, but this year we saw great success with the partnership with Planting Seeds, Monroe County Opportunity Program, and some business owners throughout the city with the new murals program. And so the planning department or division within the department is requesting $15,000 to begin establishing a public art fund. We don't know quite yet what that is going to look like. We've had some discussions and ideas about providing a match program for future. And with this project this year, the business owners were required to help pay for the cost of the mural as well as partly fundraising. And we'd like to explore some additional grants to help with these quality of life and placemaking initiatives as well. And so we've requested $15,000 to seed an account to grow that into the future. Looking outside the murals program as well, there's some opportunities to look at sculptures and other public art initiatives as well.
Mark, if I might, Mr. Mayor, if I might. I see 15,000, that's just chump change. What I would propose in order to support you on that project is to take, I see you got $100,000 for City Hall courtyard landscaping, $375,000 for some other, and another, to renovate the city manager and finance office, $540,000. I would propose you take some money out of those 3 buckets and move it over into your public art and increase the 15,000 is chump change. That isn't going to go anywhere. So
we'll look at some sources. By the way, the city manager took out the renovation there. It's not in this year's project.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'll see.
Find someplace else. Take it out of engineering someplace.
You're seeing it as it's the project cost, but the next line is funding is zero. It's sometimes there are some of these on here that were discussed, but there's no funding that's being made available.
understand that,
You're
Mr.
right
Mayor,
on the
but
mark.
He's a magician when it comes to funding. He can find it someplace.
But it does underscore a discussion that we've had, is where do we start? I mean, I started anywhere from 50,000 down to 25 and ended up settling on 15, but it is, it's very visible, and, how much commitment do you want to make on the front end? It's a very legitimate question. And what do you take it from to balance it out? So,
There's gotta be bucks in there someplace.
well, we've worked Mr. Sell over pretty darn good here this last couple of years, but we'll certainly take it into consideration before it's finalized.
I thought I saw another hand. Oh, Councilman Felder.
Yes. So in regards to continuing the mural policy that went forward, we did a pilot project. The pilot project was very successful. Are we anticipating that to accompany this allocation for the public art projects that we're going to see a mural or a public art policy put forward? I know we've been waiting on one of those for a while.
Yeah, well, the policy that was implemented this year was working with the business owners. We got a license agreement on the long-term maintenance of it. Where we didn't look yet is the downtown, and painting murals directly onto historic buildings and how that relates within the historic overlay district. So I think this year it worked out very well in working with the organizers, planting seeds, and the private property owners, and the agreements that they had to sign in terms of maintenance that was approved by City Council, and the requirements that if they don't upkeep it, we're going to paint over it and charge them. And so that worked very well this year, and we would look at license agreements for things like sculptures going forward if they're on private property and such. So
I think Mr. Felder in our discussion is looking from a policy standpoint, and him and I had chatted a little bit about it. Okay, how do we decide in the future which projects we're going to do? What's the criteria for that consideration, if I'm understanding our previous conversations?
Well, a bit, but something that allows for a clear and level playing field for everyone
Yeah.
who wants to take part in this program in the future, with or without our participation, so that they can have the investment upon and take it upon themselves to, and that's what essentially we're trying to spur and leverage here with these funds, and take it upon themselves to improve their little small part of the community. So the things that we would want to see, things that we wouldn't want to see, I know that you had in the documentation packet that we had with some of those business owners, there were qualifications on what they could do, what they couldn't do, and then, of course, the maintenance agreements.
Yeah.
So at the very least, if I could get a copy of that documentation packet, I mean, that would be a good starting place. And then I think the process of that looks probably something similar to what we did on the naming committee. You want to make sure that it's tasteful and respectful of the heritage and culture of the community, right?
Yeah, and one of City Council's goals and objectives this year or last year was also to establish the Arts and Culture Commission as well. And we had talked about seeding the public art initiative within that commission to guide and make recommendations to City Council. And that's sort of the structure and framework we can continue to look at.
And even if we route the approval process through that committee, I think that's totally appropriate. I just want something that's written out and established. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
The next request through the Economic Development Division was to implement the white boxing of the whistle stop history. Just a minor recall, the city bought this for the purposes of white boxing it, preparing it for redevelopment, finding a tenant. Those conversations have been well underway for about a year. We've worked with the architect as City Council approved, and gotten the renderings and the requirements of what it's going to take to white box the building. We have gotten multiple quotes from contractors on what it's going to take, and so the request that you see in the CIP program reflects what those costs are going to be approximately. And then the next step will be to negotiate the agreement with the potential tenant. Next is some requests within the Parks and Recreation Division. First is the adult soccer field rehabilitation. So I believe it's one of the soccer fields at the foot of the the Munson Park sledding hill We've got a partnership, as you all know, with the Monroe Family YMCA, but also Mesa. And Mesa organizes all of the youth soccer programming at Munson Park. The Monroe Family YMCA organizes all of the adult soccer programs, and sometimes there's conflict in terms of field scheduling, who's managing that, who owns the fields. And so what we're proposing is to rehabilitate one of the soccer fields that's in poor condition near the front of the park at the foot of the Munson Park Hill, and dedicate that solely toward the adult soccer community recreation program. The problem with this field is the soil quality is very poor, and so it keeps heaving rocks up, which obviously you don't want when you're running. Trying to chase a ball, playing soccer is a trip and fall hazard. And also the soil quality doesn't cultivate positive grass growing. And so we're planning to scrape the top of the soil off, put in new topsoil that's more conducive to putting turf down. When I say turf, I mean grow grass, better grass, and then also replace some of the soccer goalposts. You'll see on the left picture, those are the old aluminum frames that just set on the ground. If you've been at Munson Park, you know it's basically a giant wind tunnel. I was out there on Friday with our parks maintenance supervisor, Brad, and so many of them were blown over. And so they're not necessarily the safest, and so we're proposing to replace four sets with what you see on the right, which are the steel anchored soccer goals that are anchored into the ground. Also, with those being on the adult soccer fields, they can withstand the harder kicks of the soccer balls that adults tend to force rather above the youth. At Veterans Park, we've had a significant issue over the past 2 or 3 years with the area around the fish passage, the bridge that goes over to the area with the fish passage right next to the dam. Due to high water levels, we've been experiencing washouts in this area. I've got a few pictures, but it's really an extreme safety hazard. We've been having to go out there and backfill it after heavy river events, and so we're proposing to put a final fix in, which would mean pouring concrete over that area to prevent the erosion. This is one picture from last week where it actually looks good because the water's been really low, but come spring, that will all get washed out in that entire area again. And so proposing a final safe fix for that. And then the last request that we have is $350,000 to conduct the master plan design for St. Mary's Park. As was indicated earlier, we've completed Labor Park. Father Carnes Park is on tap for next summer, and we're starting to look at what is the next park plan to implement in the master plan that was completed in 2017. St. Mary's Park, in conjunction with the work that's being done at the MLK Bridge, we've been looking at the plaza, both plazas on each side of the bridge, and as well as the St. Mary's Park parking lot. That has been a topic of frequent conversation among citizens with city staff and I presume probably a couple of you. And so we're looking at doing the plan to start looking at construction in the future after Father Carnes for St. Mary's Park. You'll see this is the update that was taken out of the updated master plan that was presented tonight. Again, just conceptual at this point, relooking at many of the components that were included in the 2017 plan, such as moving the band shell, the removal of the tennis courts, and then also the overlooks over the river. And so none of those have been finalized, but looking at keeping several of those items at St. Mary's Park rather than removing them. And so next year we're proposing to complete the final design and then also start applying for grants to help offset the cost that this park is going to be. And that's all the projects that I have.
Question? Well, the next we have is Barry Leroy with wastewater and water department projects.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, and members of the Citizen Planning Commission. All right, so in total, we have about 14 projects between water and wastewater. I'll talk about each one of them. The city manager did talk about the criteria, pretty heavy, and so I'm not going to belabor that again. And funding's mostly is from water and wastewater reserves, as well as some future bonds and loans that we're looking at. So I'll hit wastewater first. Wastewater, the first ranked project we have is the sanitary sewer replacement and rehabilitation program. We're requesting about a little over $1 million. There's 6 locations. 3 of these are coordinated with road projects. 2 are outside the city in Frenchtown that are structurally deficient and have some root intrusion. And the last one is phase 4 of our corrective action plan. That is in the Sunset subdivision out in Frenchtown. There's almost 12,000 lineal feet that we're looking at rehabilitating. The age of these mains range from 1908 to 1977. As the city manager pointed out, our NPDS permit dictates this requirement for the corrective action plan, or a CAP program. And these rehabilitating them will extend the service life, remove inflow, infiltration, and improve the system capacity and hydraulics. Second ranked project is a multi-year funded project. We thought we had this funded, and then with the high inflation and long lead times, the cost went up on the project almost double. So actually at the last council meeting, you awarded the purchase of the generators. They have a lead time of almost 50 weeks. So we're about a little over 50% design with the project, and we're requesting an additional $500,000 for providing the cost for the construction component of the project. Again, these generators are about 50 years old. These serve as emergency backup generators. Our permit requires us to have a secondary backup source for power. And these 2 lift stations, the Sunset and Detroit Beach Station, are the 2 biggest in the system. They service virtually 100% of Frenchtown Township. So yeah, parts aren't really available for these, and they've had a lot of maintenance and repairs. Third ranked project is a fronting of about $100,000 for a state revolving fund loan that we're proposing to apply for in fiscal year 24-25. It's made up of 6 major areas. We're proposing to combine 4 phases of the corrective action plan to kind of accelerate that and get ahead of that faster than anticipated. There's about 10,000 lineal feet of sewer to be lined, about 115 laterals to be lined. That's the service leads up to your house. We'll be removing any type of defects, downspouts tied in, catch basins, that type of thing. And remove clear water. That's the goal with that project. The second one is replacing the raw sewage pumps and motors. We've studied this at the plant. It's about a $3.9 million price tag. Currently, the pumps are original. They're over 40 years old, and they're susceptible to flooding, which they have been flooded in the past, and which really leaves us in a bad state when that happens. So we're proposing to put in a type of pump that is not susceptible to flooding for that area and still serve the purpose. The next project that would be part of that loan is primary tank rehabilitation. The towers and the catwalks and sweeps would all be replaced, and some concrete rehabilitation. Next would be replacing what's called the Sunset Pump Station drum screen. When that pump station runs, it pumps it to the plant, and there's a screen there that removes solids, and that screen gets clogged up pretty easily and is undersized. So we're proposing to put in a more conventional type of bar screen that we currently have, which is a chain drive style, and it would open up the capacity for that with that upgrade. Next is there's 3 lift stations out in the 2 of them are in Monroe Township, and 1 is in Frenchtown, Keegan Road and South Monroe Pump Station, as well as Stony Point 2. These stations, they have what's called the dry well. It has the pumps and the motors, and they're about between 25 and 30 feet below ground. So staff have to go down there to operate, maintain, and repair them. And then on the other side of it is a wet well. And what we're proposing to do is convert those to our current standard, which is an above-ground structure with submersible pumps, and then remove that. We call it a can, basically, but that dry well. So it would improve safety, but it would also reduce a lot of wear and tear on staff and how to get materials in and out of them. And then last is miscellaneous improvements, and there's two primary areas. One is to rehab a collection system pole barn that's kind of been missed with all the different phases of improvements we've done over the years, and to also replace a transformer. So we're requesting $100,000 to fund the project plan development with that project, and it would be about a $9 million loan from the state is what we'd be going in competition for. The next project is a water filter we'd put on our wastewater effluent line as part of one of our processes. We desire to use our wastewater effluent for treating and cleaning part of operations. Currently we have to use potable water, which is a higher cost, so we would propose to put this in and then have a payback about less than 6 years to make up for those funds. Moving over to water, on water distribution. The first project is our water distribution replacement and rehabilitation program. It's a little more than $1 million is the request. It has 3 locations. All 3 are coordinated with a road project. The ages range from 1915 to 1955. We use a metric for determining like how many main breaks per mile. That's a pretty standard industry way of tracking whether to make a decision to move forward with a replacement. And these have about a 28 main break per mile average. We try to keep it at less than 10 if possible. With this project, we will also replace all the lead and galvanized lines, and it will improve system redundancy and fire flow. The next project is a 24-25 fiscal year request, but it would be fronting about $400,000 for the survey and design. We're looking at a $18 million bond, which would include 37 locations for replacing water mains, just under 11 miles. About 13% of the 11 miles is in the city, 70% is in Monroe Township, and 17% is in Raisonville Township. We'd be replacing old 6-inch mains and 12-inch mains and replacing with new 8-inch and 12-inch. Since 1983, we've had 274 main breaks on those different sections. And the main break per mile metric is from 0 to 123. The reason why it's 0 is because there's some looping areas we'd have in there, so those mains don't exist yet. But I mean, it's just a technicality. But the 123, these are the highest and the worst we've had in the system. We'd replace all the lead and galvanized lines there. There's almost 90. And the age of the pipe is from like 1922 through 1990. So this pipe is as old as the water systems when we purchased it.
If I might just mention that it is a big number there, the $18 million bond issue. And, you know, when we were looking at future projects, you take this one and the 14.5 I think we had for the police station, along with other road and water and wastewater projects. That's how you get to 45 pretty quick is with that. So it's a big project. I know we've talked about it before with the council, but and it does encompass areas throughout our water distribution system outside the city.
Yep. This is the second slide for this. These are just all the areas with all the information that I just described. Okay, moving on to the water filtration division. This next project is a little over $1 million request for a multi-funded year project. This project is 95% designed. We were ready to go out for bids, and then we got the engineer's updated estimate, and it went up from up to $1.9 million. This is a regulatory required project. We have to add an additional pump. This is the South Custer Booster Station. It's just on the east side of the fairgrounds. it increases the pressure, for the western communities in our system. Basically, Raisonville Road West all gets serviced with this station. So we would have to do a building expansion. We're going to replace the backup generator and communications. So this would get us to the point where we'd be able to have the estimated cost based on the engineer's estimate to move forward. Next project is some vibration and temperature monitoring equipment. We've had a lot of pump rehab and repair and replacement in the last 10 years, so we're looking at trying to establish some baselines. This equipment is about a $20,000 request to install vibratory and temperature monitoring equipment on our high service pumps at the water plant to establish baselines, and we would be able to pick up on defects and deficiencies and then move forward with repairs on a minor sense instead of a catastrophic situation. The last project in the filtration division is a roof replacement over the filter building. This was replaced in 1993. It has a lot of shingle damage and repairs and maintenance, so we're proposing to replace that to maintain the structure integrity of that building. Moving over to the partnership, the raw water station partnership. The first project is very similar to the high service. This is a same type of project, but it would be on the low service pumps for installing vibration and temperature monitoring equipment to serve the same purpose, to help us establish baseline information to make a little more educated decisions, and when we'd need money sooner, instead of doing more reactive, we'd be able to program it a little easier. That's the idea here. Next project is a multi-year funded project for pump rehab, motors, and variable frequency drive upgrades at the raw water station. Most of these pumps that we're looking at doing upgrades are on the 1948 side of the plant, or the facility out at the station. And the goal is to maintain the capacity and efficiency of those pumps operating to serve both the city of Monroe and Frenchtown Township. It's a $35,000 request. And the last project is a multi-year funded project. It's a contribution towards the additional raw water pump that we've been trying to move forward with. This project we started design, and the engineer's estimate came back much higher due to an electrical upgrade that wasn't anticipated. So we are going to go through a few more requests for getting the funds to move forward with the second pump. And the goal is to meet our plant capacity with being able to pump raw water at the same capacity as the plant. It's our firm capacity is what we're trying to get to on here, and that'll give us the redundancy and reliability we need. So with that, is there any questions for?
I got a question.
Yeah.
It seems like I got a lot of them tonight. Of all the projects that you went through, and I guess this goes in your predecessor also, of all the projects you went through, how many and what are the ones that you must have to have, and one that we really would like?
Out of all these?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Because, in a couple more weeks, you're gonna ask us to approve a budget, which I sure as hell don't know where these numbers come from.
Well, let me start just, kind of what we talked about. A lot of these are driven by the state regulatory process, the booster station,
Vince, I understand. I'm just asking which ones
Well-
that we like to have or ones we must have because of regulatory or because the equipment is taking a crap or whatever it is.
Yeah. And you have to understand, when I look at them and recommend them, I've kind of asked a similar question, but Barry, go ahead.
Okay.
I mean, I seriously, I do.
Okay.
And what we can,
I would hope that you would.
yeah.
Okay, Barry, yeah.
Well, about 3/4 of these are regulatory driven.
Okay.
And tied in with those are also road-related projects. So if you don't fund those projects, then you're going to put a brand new road over a water main that's not been replaced. And Patrick would absolutely loves when I dig up his new roads. So that's what I'm trying to avoid with those. But the regulatory ones, those are a must. The bond projects, those are desires, but it's on equipment that is needed to be done. I was thinking about putting a different screenshot with all the main breaks it kind of tells you a little more story on where they're at. But that's where we're focusing on. We're trying to minimize the emergency repairs outside the city with that large
Which is
bond.
the way to go on it.
Right, right. And with the interest rates going up on bonds, the state revolving fund is the cheapest option right now. That's a 2.5% loan with recent bond was almost 5% on a recently. So anyway, yeah,
All right,
that's,
well, thank you, Barry.
yep.
Is the emergency repairs, you educate me a little bit, is that something that's done with a crew that's staffed, or is that contracted out?
Yes, that's with staff. So that would be like a water main break, which staff are then dispatched, and that's 24/7, whether it's, you know, during the day or Christmas Eve. So that's how that usually works.
So these would then cut down on a lot of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we would cut down on a lot of emergency repairs, yes.
And is there a way to look at the cost of those? Oh, thank you.
On the water main breaks?
Just like the emergency repairs, like is that
So each main break varies, but they typically can cost
over the course of like a calendar year?
on a camp. Well, each break is about $2,500 to $3,500
Okay.
per repair. So we do 30 to 40 minimum per year.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would cut down on the operation cost quite a bit.
All right, thank you.
Barry, you showed a picture of a water main.
Yep.
We were talking about lead in it, in a mud hole right there.
That was on East Elm Avenue,
Okay,
right across from the battlefield.
that is a lead pipe?
That's a cast iron water main.
That's a cast iron.
It blew a hole right out to the main.
Have you, in the city, are there a lot of lead pipes still in existence that are being used?
Yes, we
They have to be replaced.
Yep, we have to replace about 82 a year, based on our regulatory requirements.
The water that is being transmitted to those pipes, are the metrics such that are falling within safety
Yes.
numbers?
Yep. We just went through our testing. We have to do annual testing. Our 90th percentile was 4 parts per billion.
Okay, thank you. That answers that question.
Councilman Felder?
Good thing we're on this slide because my question was about the bond issue. So the 18 million we're just borrowing from the state revolving loan fund at 2.5%, and we'll just pay it back through the rate base system as usual.
The state revolving fund is for wastewater. The water bond would be probably a capital improvement bond,
Gotcha. And so
maybe a little higher
you
interest
said
rate.
87% of this project takes place outside of the city of Monroe?
87%. Yeah, that's Raisinville and Monroe Township. Yes.
Explain to me the complexities of how we're going to do a CIP bond with 3 different jurisdictions involved. What's that look like?
Well, the good thing is the city owns the system, but we would be routing this through Patrick. Engineering would be handling the contract. He would probably need some support for inspections and things like that. But they would all be coordinated through a variety of contracts to complete it in smaller chunks, probably 3 to 4 miles apiece.
Oh, I mean, where's it go on the ballot? Who's voting for it and who pays for it?
This
Ultimately, it's going to be the city council to make that decision. If we go the capital improvements bond that Mr. Loy alluded to, that runs through the county drain commissioner, where we get a little better rates because of their bonding capacity, and we've done that with other wastewater projects. But we also have agreements with all the jurisdictions related to this water service, so we don't run into any legal problems with that as well. So. But ultimately, it's going to be the city council is the one that's going to have to decide whether to issue the bonds or not.
Certainly, it'll be on us to issue the bonds. So are the city residents, is the property tax increase going to fall entirely on city residents?
This would be revenue it's built into the revenues.
This is, okay.
Yep.
sewer rates,
Gotcha.
water would portion, sewer, yep.
And that would be across the board?
Yeah, it's prorated based on whether you're in this, where you live.
Despite 87% of the project taking place in
Well, part of it is too, you have to understand, there's a different rate for those customers outside the city than in the city.
Okay.
So,
You see what I'm getting at?
yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thank you.
Wait a minute, on that same subject, if 87% of the cost of that project is going to be benefiting Raisinville and what other township out there, Monroe Township, or?
They pay.
Is that 87% going to be, is it going to have to be covered by the taxpayers of the city? City
No,
residents are
it's-
going,
it's-
or is that going to be spread across those other two townships?
It's yes, it's spread across all ratepayers.
Okay.
So inside the city, outside the city, customers pay twice the debt service and twice the rate consumption rate.
Thank you, Barry. That answers that question.
So I mean that's built into our agreements with the jurisdictions.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thanks, Barry.
How's that?
Barry? Patrick?
Next.
Evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. Patrick Lewis, Director of Engineering and Public Services, for my turn at the wheel here. Okay, I'm going to try to hold to that 45 seconds per slide, so we'll see how I do.
Doc.
This shows sort of an introductory slide that sort of steps you through a summary of what we've got here. We have 8 projects funded in the streets category for about $3.16 million. 6 of those requests are for our city-funded streets program, and that'll be the one that will be bid through the city. 1 federal aid job, which is Macomb Street, and I'll explain that when we get to that. And then 1 other that would actually be administered through MDOT, which we talked about at the last council meeting relative to the mast arm traffic signals. You've heard the spiel before in other years, but I'll just briefly go over it for some of the new folks that may not have heard it. What we do with our streets every year is we'll drive them. The Superintendent of Public Services, Assistant City Engineer, and I drive those streets. We'll do a block-by-block rating. It's a subjective one to some degree, but we do have some guidelines. With 0 to 10 being the rating on that, and 10 being basically impassable, 0 being perfect, and then we rate the curbs on a 0 to 4. Again, 0 being perfect and 4 being basically non-existent. And that's the way we sort of weight the curbs versus the driving surface. So we look at other things too, like repair and maintenance history. Are we cold patching that roadway a lot? Are there federal funds that we can use on that? Because those usually get a little more accelerated in the schedule because there's only so many different roads we can use federal funds on. And then we, as Mr. Leroy talked about, we did coordinate project locations with the water department. Sometimes we'll move a project of his a year or 2 up in the schedule because he's got more, he's got the ability to fund it that year. Sometimes I'll have to wait a year or 2 on the project so we can fit it in with his, because as we mentioned, I love nothing less than him tearing up a brand new street. So we try to coordinate those. That's the most important criteria. The mileage we've got for this year, we had a really big year last year, and we've met a lot. We've met a lot of those needs with curb replacement, things like that. So we're not doing quite as much mileage this year coming up as we've done some past ones. We've got a little under 2 miles, with about a little over half of that being an asphalt resurfacing program, and 0.8 of a mile being concrete reconstruction. We are using the 15-year 2 mil streets and trails levy for that. I also categorize our infrastructure separately that's non-street related, so we've got kind of two different pots I'm going to present tonight. We have 6 projects funded with that, a little under $4.8 million. Those projects consist of 6 ones that were funded, and that is the 22, that should read 23 sidewalk program, the MLK Bridge Rehabilitation Trail Development Program, rehabilitation of the taxiway at Custer Airport, our usual stores and equipment fund vehicle and equipment replacement, and the city employee parking lot rehab, and we've just got a design allocation for that. Whoops, went too fast. Sort of touched on this earlier, just a minute ago. We do that review. We say September. This year we actually did it in August. Talked about the 0 to 10, curb 0 to 4, and then we give an additional point if it's a major street or if we can find evidence of a base failure that threatens the rest of the stability of the pavement. And then we combine those blocks into longer sections because we don't want to do a block here and a block there. So we try to do 2 or 3 or at least 4 blocks in a bigger section if they deteriorate at the same rate. Sometimes, as last year, we've done single blocks, but we try to combine those that are logical. So out of a total of 16 points possible, which you'll never get to because we never let a major street get completely impassable, we usually start to consider them for funding when they're at a 7 or an 8, depending on how many needs we have for the year. We prepare a map and a full report, and that's available all year round on the city's website. And we review, Barry and I review the 7 pluses every year to look at what his needs are, what my needs are, and try to line that program up. As I mentioned earlier, federal aid eligibility is sorted separately, and those are our highest volume major streets, and that's because we get a set-aside entitlement every year through the Surface Transportation Program of the Federal Highway. So again, you'll see sometimes we're going to resurface streets that are in better shape than other ones that we're not doing, and that's simply because we have more money to keep our highest volume streets in better shape. So we have to line up those categories. As I mentioned, it's not always worst first. Sometimes, which you'll see what we did last year, we did an exclusively concrete street program because we wanted to bid those all together for cost efficiency, and we did bid that significantly under our estimate, so that was a good thing. This year we're going to shift back over to some asphalt projects because last year the concrete pricing was good, but we're seeing major cement shortages in the industry right now, so that's flipping that a bit more. We're still picking the method that makes the most sense for the road we have. It's still, on a life cycle cost, cheaper for concrete if you're replacing curbs at the same time and the roadway has some base issues. If you're, one street we've got coming up, I'll show you, we're only doing spot curb. It's an existing asphalt street. It makes sense to do that in asphalt. We advance those critical utility projects like Mr. Laurie talked about. If we have one street that's got a lot of main breaks and our street is kind of marginal and we could do it in the next 5 years, sometimes that gets moved near the front of the line because he absolutely has to do his in the next year or so. We strive for some degree of geographic balance, but we're not looking around saying each precinct gets one project because that's not, but we try to make sure that we're not doing 5 or 6 streets that are all together and creating a traffic nightmare in one area. With the exception of the St. Mary's Gardens project this year, which we are doing a comprehensive storm sewer. So we're doing that all at once for that good reason. Parallel construction on other routes. Obviously, if we're looking at, if the state has a project on Monroe Street, we're probably not going to do a project on Macomb Street. So that only makes some sense. So I'm going to breeze through one at a time here, not spending a lot of time on each project. Kind of can see for yourself, I've given you a nice picture of the worst of each of those streets. Our number one priority this year, Washington Street from 8th to 3rd. That's the one I talked about that would be a milling and resurfacing. We're doing about 40% of the curbs, I think. A couple of whole blocks and then some spots here and there. That'll be a 3-inch milling and resurfacing. We're also doing the water main between 7th and 4th. And it was last resurfaced in 1990, so this is a 33-year-old street by the time we get to it. We have, by the way, already reached out to Monroe Public Schools to discuss how we're going to coordinate those projects. We're going to do the water main project during the summer, and they've said that the resurfacing is probably less of an inconvenience. We cannot do both projects in 10 weeks. There's just too much work to do. So we're already reaching out and looking at those things. Streets number 2, this is immediately adjacent to that Washington Street project, but this is a little bit different. This has some base issues, and we need to do some regrading to make it drain properly. So this is one where we're going to tear it out and do it in concrete because it needs a full curb job. This was last resurfaced in 1982, so now we're at 41 years for this one. Water main replacement in the same area. So this will be replacing the older cast iron line with a new ductile iron line. Project 3 was actually on your list last year. We started working on it. It was probably the worst street we had last year. We got into it, realized the significant amount of storm work we had to do and significant amount of regrading, realized we didn't have enough money. So here I am asking for additional funds. And what we also decided to do was Mr. Leroy was going to replace the water main between Tremont and Macomb. We were originally only going to do the street between Monroe and Tremont. We're going to extend that to the block to Macomb Street because we have to put the water main under the road. So it was marginal enough. This is one of those where I accelerated that other block. We've mentioned this before. We are narrowing the roadway from 34 to 26 feet in the block between Monroe and Tremont. That is actually 2 feet wider than the section east of there. So we have, and I know it was raised when we were first talking about this, on the non-motorized demands and needs like that. This was not identified as a primary bicycle area, and it's very low traffic, so this is one area where we think that those can be shared. Narrowing the roadway actually helps us out quite a bit on grading. There's a number of steep driveways near the farmers market area. We're actually able to flatten those out by narrowing that roadway, which gives a longer run. So as I mentioned, this one will also be a conversion to 8-inch concrete with full curb replacement. This was last resurfaced, as far as we can tell, in 1955. The concrete section was newer than that, east of Tremont. Streets number 4 is another one that we're asking for additional funds on because we were intending to do this as just a mill and fill last year. This would have been the only asphalt street, so we elected to postpone it. We started looking at this in a little more depth, and in conjunction with the Washington Street project, we want to do the block between between Washington and Scott, reconstruct that in concrete because that is the bus staging area. And we feel like that would be problematic if we just resurface that. But the block between Monroe and Washington will be asphalt with most curb and gutter replacement on that. Last resurfaced 1960 between Monroe and Washington, and 91 between Washington and Scott. Streets project number 5 is Arbor Avenue between Linwood and Orchard. We took a fair number of complaints on this one last year, particularly because we were resurfacing Riverview one block over. I mentioned the federal jobs getting a little more attention. That's exactly what happened there. That was a federally eligible street because it's a collector. Arbor is not. So we have to use city funds on that. This is another one where we're replacing the water main in that area. So by the time we get done tearing up the trench for that, replacing the curbs, doing some base adjustments, this one makes sense to do as a concrete reconstruction. So we can't find any evidence that this was resurfaced since it was originally built in 1954, so this one's definitely due. Our priority number 6, we did end up actually pulling off the table in favor of a couple of other ones that came to our attention late in the game. We were looking at it from Smith to Monroe, then we went from Harrison to Monroe. You can see the condition of it. It clearly needs to be done. This is one that Mr. Leroy needs to replace the water main all the way down to Union, so we think we'll let this sit another year or two and then do a longer project to meet his needs and ours. So while this is probably the worst street we're not doing this year, there's a logical reason why we're leaving this aside. And both 4th and 6th are in excellent shape. We just did 4th Street 2 years ago. We can't tell when the last time this was resurfaced because I don't have any plans since it was built in the 1920s, but it's pretty clear that's at least a 30-year-old street. Project number 7 is just an allocation request for design funding. This was intended to be our 2024 federal aid project, and that is East 1st Street from Macomb to Winchester. The last resurfaced in 2007. So the good thing is when we hit these roads on their cycles between 15 and 20 years, we don't have to do a lot of additional work. This one has fairly heavy truck traffic, and while it's not in extremely poor shape, it is starting to alligator along the wheel paths. This is a project which we clearly are going to be examining this for bike lanes, and we do think we have enough room to make that work without taking parking off. So this is one that will be a very key point in that trails plan. So we're requesting $50,000 for design funding so we can start working on this within the next fiscal year. We will be pulling forward 24 and 25 funds to do in 2024 for our federal allocation. So Project 8 is one that came up late in the game. I can't quite explain where the money came from, but the best of our understanding is the state of Michigan borrowed some federal funds that were intended to be spread for the urban area pots for a lot of their construction work in 2022 and returned it for federal aid, the local federal aid committees. So the city had $540,000 roughly in federal funds show up for next year that we were not aware of until sometime in November. That's why this was not in your original packet. We had, in order to do something with it, the next project we were able to move up, which was originally intended for 2026 construction, but which you'll remember I had looked at for a microsurfacing job, is resurfacing a North Macomb Street from Grove to the city line. And that would be the city line near Country Club Circle. The city line migrates a bunch of different times in and out. Our jurisdiction ends about 1,000 feet north of Maywood, so that's where we would stop the project. It's got spot curb replacement, 3-inch milling and resurfacing. It was last resurfaced in 2001 when the extremely steep crown was milled and removed out of that. And so we're looking at this one for moving it all the way from 2026 into 2023. Again, this is a project where it's currently 3 lanes, 36 feet wide. If we choose to eliminate the center turn lane, we can accommodate bike lanes on both sides of the road from Grove to the city line. And I'm pretty positive we're going to advocate doing that because the traffic is not significant enough to warrant the turn lane, but we had the space, which is why it's there. So I've just identified 2 projects that are already in keeping with that trails plan that you heard earlier tonight. So this one requires $260,000 of city match because we're required to put in 20% plus any of the overage, and we think it's about an $800,000 job. So this $260,000 essentially is the money that was originally intended for West 5th Street. But this is a higher priority project, even though it shows up as our 8th priority because it was late to the game. The last project we have in the streets side is the request that I discussed with council a week ago. And that was another one that came to our attention fairly late in the game. They had approached me earlier in the spring, but then didn't really follow up. MDOT is upgrading traffic signals at 4 locations right now along the US 24 corridor, and one of those is at M125 in Noble. When they do that, they replace the diagonal span, which has poles on 2 of the 4 corners, with the traffic signals kind of in the middle of the intersection, with a configuration that looks like this, but their standard configuration is wood poles with a wire between them on the far side of all intersections. That's not the norm in most states. Michigan's kind of a rarity in that we accept the, I'll say, lower tier design on that. The photo is an example of what we just did as a city for the Lazy Boy project, and that was US 24 and Holiday. Now, we put the mast arms in, and we had to pay for the entire installation because we were reconfiguring the lanes out there. We added a right turn lane, and Holiday was adding a left turn lane, so the state made us realign those heads. Keeping with our design standards that we want to see, that's why we've got those, we went with the upgrade to that. It cost us about $150,000 to do that. It'd be more like $200,000 a day because that project was bid 2 years ago. What the state has asked us is, do we want to pay the upgrade so instead of having wood poles with span wires on the far side of the intersection, we have a configuration that looks like this with mast arms. Clearly they're better looking. They're a little bit more insulated against power outages in that they don't have wires. If there's an outage for another reason on the feed to it, it'll still be subjective to power loss. And the poles are a little more robust, which make them a little less likely to be knocked down. As I mentioned to council a week ago, it's not a strong safety case. It's not a strong case for protection against power outages. I'd say it's a marginal one. They're definitely better. I don't think you'd make the case on that alone. But we've requested putting in $80,000 each for these intersections and making that commitment to the state, which they were going to be looking for very shortly. I emailed them today and told them they need to give us a little bit more time because we needed to at least present it to both bodies. So we're only responsible for the upgrade, not the full reconfiguration, or I'll say modernization that the state would call it. So I want to make that clear. We're basically getting it about 40 cents on the dollar, if you would, versus if we had to do the whole intersection ourselves. And it's being driven by MDOT's timeline. So I think I've discussed that enough. Maybe I should stop now on the streets and see if there's any questions before I go on to our other projects.
For the mast arms, that was for all those intersections?
Yeah, they gave us a cost of about $60,000 to $80,000 per intersection, but they won't know until they get the design done. But they don't want to do the design until we've given them sort of a soft commitment to do it. I think it could even be more than 80 at the intersection of US 24 and M50 because it's so wide, but I think it'll be the lower end on most of the other ones. So
I think it was slide 7 was, is that the new entryway to the city that we're talking about in the plan for the River Raisin? That with the River Raisin plan is talking about one of the gateways into the city. Is that stretch?
it would be part of that stretch, yes. I mean, it would. We're not with part of that project. That would just be a straight up resurfacing. The federal funds, it complicates it if we use things like enhancements and other things. But it would certainly be a part of that.
Okay, it's taken into consideration.
Yeah, and that's why we're looking at the bike lanes on that stretch too. It's federal projects are difficult to bid. I'll say niceties, enhancements in them, unless that's a fully enhancement job, because the nature of contracting right now is asphalt contractors like to blow and go. Yeah. Get in there, mill, pave, and get out. So we could easily do that. It remains our road. We could spend city dollars in the future to do something additional with that.
I was wondering, I just wanted to make sure that's what I was thinking.
It's the same road relationship to I-75 and the discussion on the gateway coming in.
Yeah.
That's
Yep,
correct.
absolutely.
Councilwoman Germaini?
Were we, probably did not have time yet, reach out to Monroe Township with reference to the 7th Street?
I have not yet. Yeah, we still can. I mean, it would be nice if we decide we want to go ahead with it, if we say, hey, can you give us half of the cost of it? But
So it'll require correspondence to be sent there. That'll be
Yeah.
next. Councilman Lamore?
Same question.
Councilman Feller? Okay.
Isn't the road commission the jurisdictional authority for that? But you'd look to the township to.
yeah, the road commission is a jurisdictional authority, but my strong belief is the road commission would not be interested in doing that from a strictly aesthetic standpoint, because they wouldn't view it as their mission is more well defined than ours as a city, where we're looking at transportation and road needs, but also what we want to be as a community. So, all
I
right. Well,
anticipate there'll be further conversation, at least I know with the council, maybe with the planning commission in their meetings as we go forward on that particular item.
I would be
Next.
surprised if that were not the
Next.
case. Infrastructure. Okay, so these are the other projects that are not necessarily just streets. The 2023 sidewalk program, this is one we've tried to do every year. We try to continue. The costs just keep going up. I'm really astounded. Contractors don't like to bid this work. We found a good contractor that actually kind of enjoys it. The request for this year is $250,000 from the streets and trails millage. We proactively mark areas with an inch or greater vertical separation and/or general deterioration. If it's got one crack, we're not going to mark it. If it's got multiple cracks and if it's more than an inch, we're going to mark it. The target area this year would be south of the river between Scott and Navarre. We actually had to lop that area off of this year's program because the rest of it got so big and expensive. And we're roughly on a 10-year rotation. It's kind of more like 12 when we have to pare this down. So, but we also take complaints the rest of the year. So we'll get spot locations that come in from all over the city, so we have to plan for that. And now that the city is paying for that out of the streets and trails millage, there's no assessment to the property owners. I will say we are tending to get a few more complaints than we used to when there was a belief that there would be an assessment. So that's where we're going with that. The second project, and I kind of inserted this, we inserted this afterwards, so my numbering may not fit exactly with what I've got in the original submission, but our second priority would be the Martin Luther King Jr. footbridge rehabilitation. I identified about $400,000 in previous funding. That's not 100% correct because I think we had like some rounding error in there, but we're essentially $400,000 that we've identified before that's going into this, along with $500,000 from the trails millage and a $100,000 contribution from the DDA. And the footbridge needs a lot of work. It was originally built in the late 80s. And we're looking at painting the whole structure, replacing the deck with something other than wood, new lighting scheme, which we're finding to be fairly expensive, repairs to the stairway. There's a lot of crumbled concrete on the south approach. The fencing is just chain link attached to there. We're looking at something better. And then some minor ADA modifications leading up to it. So it seems like $1 million project. It seems like a footbridge shouldn't be $1 million project, but it's definitely trending that way. So we're looking at probably not being able to get that constructed until 2024. Project number 3. This is a trail development program, and I know this may appear in a place other than my infrastructure, but we've allocated in total $50,000 last year, which was intended to be used for just kind of preliminary design, and $400,000 for this coming year. The exact locations and projects have not yet been finally determined, but we want to support the Trails Committee initiatives. We're definitely going to need, if the Loop Trail project goes forward in the next year, we're going to need to have some city match on that, so this would be certainly a source of that. There's other smaller projects within the city we could get going on. We could look at securing easements and properties for the connector into downtown. There's a whole host of things that are identified on that Trails plan that we can pull from, but they may be 10,000 here, 15,000, 20,000. So project number 4 is the biggest one we've got in our queue here, but it's also the one that we only have to pay 5% for. Custer Airport Taxiway was built in 2002. It's 5,000 feet long by 35 feet wide, and that's to allow planes to taxi out there so they don't have to taxi using the runway. I identified previous funding on there, which was only $5,200 of city funds. The current request is $117,000 from the airport fund, and we've been building this up for years in anticipation of the project. Airport projects are 90% federal, 5% state, and 5% local. So this one's a little strange. We're hoping to get it built this fall, but we have to bid the project locally this time. There's been changes in the federal legislation. We have to bid it locally and then get it approved once we know what the dollars are. So a contractor has to hold their prices for 4 or 5 months, and we hope that we get it approved. Lately, they haven't been approving projects till August or September. So I'm going to say it's a 2023 project, but it might float to 2024. Stores and equipment vehicle and equipment replacement. This is more of a rolling stock kind of thing.
Yeah, I got a question on the airport.
Yeah.
We have had a discussion previously regarding the airport's future in our community, whether or not we want to expand it, whether or not we ever anticipated operating in the black. I know it's a difficult thing to get the airport to be in that position. Once we make these improvements, is that going to hamper any future plans that we may have to expand upon this project? For the same reason that we don't that we try and align our water main projects and our road projects. You see what I'm saying?
Well, if the interest is in continuing to own and develop the airport and try to get that financially in the black, then this project clearly supports that. If the interest is to get out of the airport business, the federal grant assurances have a requirement that if the airport is closed and you want to close up the airport entirely, you owe back the previous 20 years in federal funds that were used on the airport. It makes it very prohibitive to close an airport. The state has the right to buy it at fair market value. I don't believe that's the direction we're going, but that's obviously, one of those things that when you take a big pile of federal money like this, that's something that's got to be taken into account. I have not seen any belief from any of our governing bodies that we're interested in not having the airport. But the challenge is more on the how do you get activity at the airport, because we can't use funds on things like hangars. They consider those revenue-generating facilities, and therefore the state won't allow us to use federal funds on those types of projects.
So the state is subsidizing us building a money pit.
The state is very clearly subsidizing this project because our entitlement through the federal aviation block grants is $150,000 per year, which we can bank up for up to 4 years. So the maximum we ever have available to us in federal funds in any year is $600,000. That's a whole lot more than $600,000. So basically, the state is giving us $1.6 million on top of our entitlement to do the taxiway. And quite frankly, it's not in as bad shape as any of the roadways I just showed you. In fact, it's not even close. But as we all know, aviation facilities need to be held to a higher standard because of the risks involved with landing a plane on a runway or a taxiway that might have chunks come out of it.
Right. No, I think it sounds like a great deal for us. I just know that we have a pending plan here on the long-term future of the airport, and it would be a shame to make this kind of investment and then have to go back and be like, this didn't really fit into what what we need to try and do to make this feasible in the long term.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
This is resurfacing a facility we presently have. So unless we have an idea of what other things we're going to do, there was a long-term, I don't want to get too much into it tonight because I know the hour is getting late, but there was a plan a long time ago to move the runway, shift it, allow for, larger jets, things like that. I don't think anyone's interested in pursuing that at the present time. So that being the case, this project does certainly facilitate anything we would want to do at this point.
Question for the city manager. Have we allocated funds up to this point in time on a airport master plan?
I think we do have some funding for the master plan update, don't we not?
I say this fully understanding that the airport is not your first, second, or fifth priority in terms of the things that you have to do in your day-to-day job.
No, and I would like it to be higher. I would like to ever get to a point where we can make it higher because it is an asset that we could utilize. But like I said, I think that's a conversation maybe for another day as far as operationally some of the challenges we have and where we need to go.
But going back to the master plan question, didn't with our new consultant, we were looking at doing that, or trying to remember?
We're looking at doing that. We didn't necessarily set aside funding in there.
Yeah.
The airport fund has done fairly well the last few years because we haven't had bad winters. That's where we kind of bleed some cash there is a lot of plowing and things like that. But where we have good winters, we generally are breaking even or a little better than that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so moving on to our rolling stock, if you will, here. We have $750,000 in the kitty, in the request anyway, for Stores and Equipment Fund replacement. About $500,000 of that is the rig you see in the photo there, which is actually owned by TC Tree Service that did our contract removals for us last year. Dr. Everly and I have been trying mightily to fill our forestry positions. This is one of those areas where we struggle to be able to fill that. We looked at this unit as a way that we could possibly widen our pool of available people. It takes a different type of person to get up in a bucket 70 feet in the air with a chainsaw. This unit allows you to do that from the ground. So it's something we're looking at for our long-term forestry operations. So we're looking at financing that against the Stores and Equipment Fund revenues, which we receive revenues whenever we use the equipment. We get an hourly rate if it's used on Major Street, local street, that type of stuff, and we rent our equipment to the respective departments, including our utility departments, on a monthly basis. Not the heavy equipment for the utilities, but the light-duty vehicles. So that's where the Stores and Equipment Fund makes its money. Other purchases we've got in there, we'd like to get a new loader for DPS, and then we always budget the police aftermarket, things like your cages for the back seats, your light bars, that type of thing. So that's where the money is for that. I won't belabor that too long. Again, that's something I'm sure council will have further discussions on the forestry unit because it relates to the operating budget as well. Project number 6 was not funded. We removed that. I had requested it just to look at it. We've paved the west side of the DPS property on Jones Avenue. This is the east side, and the south part of it, the loop around, is currently unpaved. We would like to pave it up to our maintenance garage, which is the south end of that, so we'd be wrapping around. It just didn't hit a high enough priority, so it was not recommended for funding at this point, but I wanted city manager asked that we put in projects that were not funded as well. City employee parking lot. This is another one where we didn't fund it, but we did fund $50,000 for design activities. Future funding is about $350,000 for construction. This would be reconstruction of the entire lot, addition of landscaping and pedestrian paths. That is not a parking lot that is compliant with our zoning ordinance, for example. We have no landscaping, we have no delineated aisles, the parking stalls are too narrow. We'll probably lose 20 to 30 parking spaces when we make this compliant with our zoning ordinance, but it needs to be done. I started here in 1998, and I can remember the lot looking a little rough already back then, so it'll be due. But we want to put the needs of some of our more high-profile projects first, those that have more broad community appeal, if you will, but this has to be done fairly soon. Project number 8 sort of rolls in with the St. Mary's Park project. I had requested it thrown in the parking lot in there just to identify a ballpark cost on the lot itself. That's $600,000. We elected, the Capital Improvements Committee administratively recommended that we roll this project into the overall park project and allocate about $350,000 for design of the whole thing. So certainly we won't be able to construct it till 2024, but this is another parking lot that will not be as big as it is when we're done with it because we don't want to have that sea of parking along the river. There needs to be a river esplanade, if you will, at least. So there's about 200 parking spaces, I believe, in this lot. It's a hefty number. Project number 9 is one that we put in there just to look at that because we were looking at parking lots. This is not as high a priority as the other ones, but when we do it, it'll be relatively cheap compared to the others. That's the Sawyer House parking lot. This one could certainly go another year or two, but we have some ADA improvements we need to make in the sidewalk ramps going up to the building and probably reconfigure where those ADA spots are in the parking lot when we do it. Long-range projects, which I have a few on here. Streets, we've got about $17 million over 5 years, so $3.4 million a year. We'll do almost 12 miles during that time frame, which is about close to 2.5 a year. 45 different roadway sections across the city. We continue to address mostly overdue full rebuilds with curbs. About half of this comes from the street millage, so had we not had this, we'd be twice as far behind. 2027, we start to see where a large number of the projects are mill and fills. There are no curbs, so we think in a few more years we'll be through the cycle of deferred curb projects. So we want to continue to be aggressive, take advantage of pricing and interest rates versus future years, although I can't tell you where we'll be in a few. Other infrastructure, $13.6 million over 5 years, which is other non-streets, so a little bit under what the streets projects are. we've got another airport project in there, and that's the runway rehabilitation, which is scheduled for a couple of years out. Again, the state's going to be giving us a giant pile of money for that beyond our entitlement. That's not in terribly poor shape, but again, it's higher standards, so they're going to subsidize it and give us that kind of money. We're not going to object to it. Each year, we've got about $300,000 set aside for sidewalks and trails. $2.5 million show up in my long-term plan, but we'll have to square this away in the actual year of construction. $2.5 million for those downtown geometric modifications, and that's going to be subject to the traffic study that we're looking at. OHM is working on a proposal for us right now. That's where those design costs will come in that were allocated that you saw in Mr. Cochran's presentation. But we've got the construction cost identified in the future year, and that's a wild guess for right now. We show another $1.5 million in fleet purchases over a 5-year period, $500,000 in alleys. We've got some money in there for the Heritage Corridor as well. That's not necessarily property acquisition, but other physical improvements. $250,000 in additional tree purchases, and we've got some more dumpster enclosures once we get the few that we've got in the queue done. Future focus should be on other elements of infrastructure. We talked about alleys. That's one that we've kind of deferred for a while here, but I would say 1 year coming up here would be a good year to do a large alley program to take advantage of some good pricing if you have a big pile of projects. Okay, that's 36 minutes. Sorry. About a minute and a half per slide.
8:30 we'd be out of here, but I was wrong. It's okay.
Any questions on the infrastructure projects?
Got a question, Pat. Who's on the capital improvement committee?
Well, the capital improvements is usually the city manager, finance director will review those, and Mr. Cochran is the economic and community development department.
So you three put this budget together.
Yeah, each department will submit the projects that they recommend, and then that group reviews them, and then along with the department head, they'll basically say, well, we need to move this here. Which of these projects can you live without? Which one's the highest priority for you? We kind of square those away on a department by department basis. But it is Mr. Sell, Mr. Pastu, and Mr. Cochran that.
Yourself.
Yeah, and then the department head involved with their respective projects.
I got a question for Mr. Pastu. A year ago, we were doing the same thing here with council, going over this budget, this wish list. I guess my question is, how did we net out on the 2022 fiscal year budget with all the projects that we and the council approved last year at this time? How did we net out in terms of dollars spent or dollars saved?
Well, I don't know about with the dollars spent. You have to understand we got $11 million from the federal government through the ARPA funds, and so we ended up putting a good chunk of that money into St. Mary's Garden project, Carnes project, and a couple of others as well. Those were projects that were needed because of issues with stormwater, rain events, with street flooding, and with St. Mary's Garden. Certainly we had Carnes Park in the queue for part of our parks plan as well. So, but as far as the last part of it, with the cost aspect of it, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking at with that.
Well, for example, on the bottom line, let's say it's $15 million.
Yeah.
Just for I was going to say some giggles, but if it was $15 million last year,
yeah,
and at the end of all the projects that were started and completed, what did you net? What did the city net out? Did it cost us more than what was estimated?
Well, everything costed more, but we carried over about $2 million of project. I think on the list you'll see prior year funding for some projects. Some of it was planned, some of it we deferred as a result of some decisions. But let me give you a context for how some of this last piece was just one afternoon. Mr. Sell and I were going through the budget, the CIP, is we end up targeting what do we want to end up as a fund balance for the general fund. I mean, that covers our operations. We got a capital projects fund. What are the ending balances that we feel are reasonable going forward with the major local street, the municipal street fund? And then through Barry's end of it, when you go through the details of putting his budget together and the planning for the rates and what have you. How do we make all of these pieces fit together? But I will tell you, the one challenge this last year, cost increases. It was phenomenal what we saw across the board everywhere. And so it took a little juggling of projects and some deferral of others to get there. And that goes back to one of my earlier slides. I didn't put cost in there, but that was a consideration, is how do you deal with the higher cost of everything?
It answers that question.
Yeah. Did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would also add to that too, that there's $9 million of last year's or previous year's funding that's under contract right now in 2 projects alone. St.
Yeah.
Mary's Gardens and Carnes, 6.4 and 2.5. So it's hard to tell where we're going to net out only 5.5 months into the fiscal year that was approved last year, because we've got so much under contract now that's still to go in front of us.
Other comments or questions?
Thank you.
On my sheet here.
You know, last is Mr. Cochran's going to give us before we even get into some other questions and comments, but here, what are the next steps?
Brief. So January 9th is the next planning commission meeting. We'll have a public hearing on the proposed CIP budget that we went through tonight, and the planning commission will make a recommendation to city council. At the July 16th 17th council meeting, January. What did I say? Well, all right. I'm taking the rest of the year off. City council meeting on January 17th. We'll introduce the CIP budget, and city council will schedule a public hearing for February 20th for consideration and approval at the meeting on February 20th. I believe it's the 20th. Maybe it's the 21st due to President's Day, but it's the second meeting in February. So. See you there.
Yep. Just was catching up on some notes here. Mr. Pastoon, any further?
Nothing else I have with the CIP tonight. I think the other item, just the one council action item, I think is the remaining that we have.
So if there's no other comments on the presentations for the 3 items that we've just reviewed, next there's an action item. I'm just going to say what it's about, and then of course it requires city council action. It's to schedule a public hearing for Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which we heard here, and it's to move and schedule a public hearing on January 17th, 2023 at 7:30 p.m. for the purpose of receiving public comment on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I'm going to look at the clerk, see if there's any additional. I think that's kind of where we're at, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'll see if there's any comments from council. If not, it's an action item. Councilman Lamore?
I just make a motion to schedule a public hearing on January 17th, 2023 at 7:30 p.m. for the purpose of receiving public comment on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan.
Motion by Councilman Lamore, supported by Councilman Felder on item 3824, the public hearing for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Felder?
Yes.
Whitman?
Yes.
Yes.
Vining?
Yes.
Germaine?
Yes.
Lamore?
Yes.
Mayor Clark?
Yes. So as we do with our meetings, as you do with yours, there's opportunity for council comments. I'm not sure if we're going to have those this evening or not, but I'm going to start and go right through. Councilman Felder?
Nothing this evening, sir. Thank you.
Councilwoman Whitman?
No comment.
Councilwoman Stilgrave? Councilwoman Vining? Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Germaine?
No comment.
And Councilman Lamore?
No, thank you, but great presentations. Thank you very much for all the help that we got.
I'll defer all my comments to the opportunities to talk to staff. I know that in administration, but please send in, think about these, read all this. I know for the council members, and I know leave and go to Chairman Schwartz, but there's a lot to digest, a lot of good conversation already, and I know we'll have more, so I appreciate that. Clerk Treasurer LaVoy?
I have no comments.
Okay. I'll turn it over to Chairperson Schwartz.
Just the last request, is there any comments with our Board of Commissioners? Councilman McDonough?
No.
Ziegler?
Nope.
Nope. No? None.
Nope, nope.
Thank you again for bringing us in on this. I think it was good, and it's good to work together on this once again, like we used to in the past. So it helps us understand it and helps us work together. So thank you.
Yes, thank you as well. Mr. Pastu, any comments?
No, Your Honor.
So I know the gentleman was here, wanted to speak, and he just left and spoke with Mr. Leroy, so I'm hoping he got his answer, or his question answered, because it's at this time, well, I see there's staff comments, so I'll go to citizens' comments first. Okay, then there's opportunity for staff comments. Mr. Cochran.
Thank you again, and I'll be brief. I just want to thank Caitlin for all of her hard work in putting all of this together. She does a tremendous job in updating all the spreadsheets, collecting all the information from all the departments, putting the presentation together, putting your printed packets together, scheduling this meeting. So I don't want her hard work to go unnoticed, and thank you, Caitlin.
Yes,
That's all.
thank you, Caitlin. I think it was great on Friday to be able to, to actually get a first review of it and in preparation. Mr. Cochran, do you have additional? All right, thank you. So I guess one thing we can talk about adjournments. I guess we both need to adjourn, correct? Clerk Treasurer?
Adjournment.
Okay, that's right, because we did this collectively. So there's no other comments?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion and support to adjourn, and that's just a roll call. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? If so, stay. Thank you.
Omar. Yes. It comes, you got a whole street load of new art.
Yeah, right. Yeah. On their two-way street, or on their two-lane street. Well, you're the one who brought it up.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's 2 lanes now. No, actually, yeah, it's 2 lanes for, it's 2 lanes for 2 blocks.
On a state highway.
I couldn't believe that when I saw it. And my wife keeps on saying, you gotta move over to the right, you gotta move over to the right.
Yeah, oh yeah.